Keep your $5. 4 words that detonated a billion-dollar empire. When Lena Carter pushed that crumpled bill back across a grease-stained table, she had no idea the trembling homeless man before her was Arthur Whitmore, tech billionaire, corporate titan, dying man conducting humanity's cruelest test. She was choosing between rent and her mother's medication. He was choosing his heir. In that forgotten Philadelphia diner at 2 a.m., with 47 cents in her pocket and blisters screaming through worn shoes, Lena made a choice that cost her everything she had and gave her everything she'd never dreamed of. Because sometimes the smallest acts of dignity become the most dangerous revolution. Sometimes refusing $5 means inheriting $5 billion. And sometimes the people we dismiss as invisible are the only ones who can truly see. Stay with me until the end of this story and drop a comment about what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale of unexpected justice travels. The rain came down like judgment that November night, turning Philadelphia's streets into rivers of neon and regret. Inside Martha's Diner on 6th and Carson, the fluorescent lights buzzed with the manic energy of a place that had witnessed too many 2 a.m. confessions, too many lives unraveling over cold coffee and yesterday's pie. Lena Carter's feet were screaming. 16 hours. 2 shifts. 1 pair of shoes that had given up their structural integrity somewhere around hour 12. She moved through the diner's familiar geography with the muscle memory of someone who'd walked these same tired steps for 7 years, refilling cups she could pour in her sleep, delivering orders she barely needed to write down anymore. Lena, table 4 needs a check. Marcus, the night cook, didn't look up from the grill where he was scraping accumulated grease with the dedication of an archaeologist. And table 7 wants to know if we have gluten-free options. She almost laughed. Almost. Marcus, we barely have food options. Tell them the toast is gluten-free if they believe hard enough. It was the kind of joke you made when you were too tired to cry. Lena grabbed the check pad, her hand automatically moving to the pocket where she kept her tips. $47.23. She'd counted it during her break, spreading the crumpled bills and coins across the break room table like a gambler calculating impossible odds. Rent was due in 3 days. $680. She had $492 if she included her actual paycheck, which meant she was $188 short. And her mother's medication, the real medication, not the generic substitute that left Mama June staring at walls and forgetting Lena's name, cost $200 every month. The pharmacy had already called twice. She had until Friday. The math didn't work. It never worked. But Lena had become an expert in the mathematics of impossible choices, in the algebra of survival, where the equations never quite balanced, but you solved them anyway because the alternative was unthinkable. She delivered the check to table 4, 2 college kids who'd been nursing coffee for 3 hours while they studied, the kind who'd leave a $1 tip and think they were generous. Then she turned to table 7, ready to explain their gluten-free options with the diplomatic creativity the situation required. That's when she saw him. He stood just inside the doorway, rain streaming off a coat that might have been expensive once, but now hung off his gaunt frame like a costume from a life he'd lost. Water pooled around shoes that had given up the pretense of being waterproof. His hands shook, not the tremor of cold, but something deeper, something that spoke of illness or age, or both. He was old. That was Lena's first clear thought. 70, maybe more, with skin that seemed translucent under the harsh lights, stretched tight over bones that looked too prominent, too sharp. His hair was plastered to his skull, more gray than white, and his eyes were the saddest thing Lena had ever seen. "Sir?" She moved toward him automatically, already reaching for a towel from the service station. "Come in out of the rain. Let me get you dried off." He flinched, actually flinched, as if kindness was something unexpected, something dangerous. I have money." The words came out defensive, apologetic. "I can pay." "I'm sure you can." Lena kept her voice soft, the same tone she used with Mama June on the bad days. "Let's just get you warm and dry first. How about booth 3? It's right by the heater." She guided him to the booth, watching how carefully he moved, how each step seemed calculated, painful. Marcus caught her eye from the kitchen, his expression carefully neutral. They'd seen plenty of homeless folks come through Martha's over the years. Some they fed, some they called the cops on when they got aggressive or started bothering customers. Most they just served and hoped wouldn't cause problems. This man didn't look like he had the energy to cause problems. Lena brought him a towel and a menu, watching as he dried his face with hands that couldn't quite stop shaking. Up close, she could see details that broke her heart. The wedding ring still on his finger, loose now on skin that had shrunk away from the metal. The watch on his wrist that had stopped at 3:17, frozen in some moment he probably couldn't remember. The way his coat sleeves were frayed, carefully mended with stitches that spoke of someone trying to maintain dignity in circumstances that had stripped away everything else. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please." He fumbled in his coat pocket, pulling out a crumpled $5 bill. It was damp, soft from being handled too many times. "And maybe toast? If that's not too expensive?" The $5 sat on the table between them like an accusation. Lena knew exactly what it represented. She'd been there, was there now, actually. $5 was the difference between eating and not eating, between a bus ride home or walking in the rain, between maintaining the illusion that you were fine. Everything was fine. You were just going through a rough patch and admitting that you'd fallen through every safety net society pretended to provide. "Toast and coffee coming right up." She didn't touch the $5. "You want butter? Jam? Whatever's included." "Everything's included?" Lena lied. She'd pay for the extras herself if she had to. She brought him coffee first, the good pot they kept in back, not the sludge they served most late-night customers. She brought real butter, not the margarine packets. She brought 3 kinds of jam. And when Marcus raised an eyebrow at the order, she just shook her head. "Don't start." "I didn't say anything." "You were thinking it loud enough." Marcus cracked an egg against the griddle with more force than necessary. "We're not a charity, Lena." "I know what we are." She grabbed the toast when it popped up. "We're a place that serves people. That's what we are." She brought the food to booth 3, setting it down carefully. The man, she still didn't know his name, stared at the plate like it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, or the saddest. Maybe both. "Thank you." His voice cracked. People don't usually." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Lena had other tables. The college kids needed refills. A trucker at the counter wanted his check. A woman in booth 7 was waving for ketchup. But she lingered for just a moment, watching the old man's hand shake as he lifted the coffee cup to his lips, watching the way his eyes closed as he took the first sip, like it was salvation in ceramic form. "You take your time," she told him. "No rush." The diner's rhythm continued around them. Marcus grilled and plated. The dishwasher chugged in the back. The door chimed as people came and went, bringing blasts of cold air and wet leaves. Lena moved through it all, her feet complaining with every step, her mind already calculating how she'd make the money stretch, which bill to pay first, which to let slide. She was clearing table 4 when she heard the voices. "Jesus Christ, did you let that homeless guy in here?" The college kid, Trevor, according to his credit card, wrinkled his nose. "He smells like a dumpster." His study partner, a girl with perfect hair and a sweatshirt that cost more than Lena made in a week, nodded. "It's totally unsanitary." I'm like, pretty sure that's a health code violation. Lena felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. "He's a customer, just like you." "He's a bum." Trevor said it casually, the way you'd identify a species of insect. "Those people shouldn't be allowed in places like this. It's gross." The girl leaned closer, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "My dad says they're all on drugs. That's why they end up on the streets. Personal responsibility, you know?" Lena's hand tightened on the coffee pot. She wanted to say so many things. She wanted to explain that those people were human beings who'd had bad luck or bad health or bad circumstances. She wanted to tell them about the month her mother got sick and Lena had to choose between the electric bill and groceries, about the night she'd sat in the dark apartment and understood exactly how close everyone was to the edge. She wanted to ask what they'd do if their perfect lives fell apart, if their safety nets disappeared, if they woke up one day and realized the world had stopped caring whether they lived or died. But she just smiled. The customer service smile she'd perfected over 7 years of biting her tongue. Your check is $8.47. Cash or card? Card, obviously. Trevor handed it over. And maybe you should tell the manager about the vagrant situation before he scares away actual customers? Lena ran the card, added a 15% tip for herself because she knew they wouldn't leave one, brought back the receipt without another word. When they left, she found $2 on the table. Not even 25%. She pocketed it anyway because that was $2 more between her and disaster. The old man was still in booth 3, his toast half-eaten, his coffee cup cradled in both hands like he was trying to absorb its warmth through his palms. Lena refilled it without asking, ignoring the way Marcus was pointedly not looking at her from the kitchen. "You okay?" she asked. The old man looked up, and Lena saw something in his eyes she couldn't quite name. Surprise, maybe, or recognition, like he'd discovered something he'd been searching for. "Why are you kind to me?" The question came out raw, unpolished. "You don't know me." Lena thought about her mother, about how Mama June had worked 3 jobs when Lena was young, how she'd scraped and saved and sacrificed so Lena could have a chance at something better. She thought about all the times they'd needed kindness and received judgment instead. All the times the world had looked at them and seen problems instead of people. "I don't need to know you," Lena said simply. "You're here. You're human. That's enough." Something shifted in the old man's face. His eyes grew wet, though he blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears fall. "What's your name?" "Lena. Lena Carter." "Lena." He repeated it like he was committing it to memory. "Thank you, Lena Carter. You have no idea." He trailed off, shaking his head. The diner continued its late-night symphony around them. A drunk couple stumbled in, demanding pancakes. A cop on break wanted coffee and pie. The dishwasher broke again, and Marcus cursed loud enough to make the drunk couple laugh. Lena moved through it all, her body on autopilot, her mind somewhere else. It was 3:47 a.m. when the old man finally stood to leave. He'd made his toast and coffee last nearly 2 hours, and Lena hadn't rushed him once. Now he was carefully buttoning his worn coat, preparing to face the rain that hadn't stopped, the night that would show no mercy. The $5 bill was still on the table. Lena looked at it. $5. She needed every dollar, every cent. She was $188 short on rent and $210 short on her mother's medication, and the math didn't work, and it never worked, and she picked up the $5 bill. The old man had his back to her, facing the door, gathering courage or strength or whatever it took to walk back out into the darkness. "Sir?" Lena's voice came out softer than she intended. "Wait." He turned. She walked over and pressed the $5 bill into his palm, folding his fingers around it gently. His skin was cold, papery. She could feel the bones underneath. "You keep this," she said. "The coffee and toast are on me tonight." The diner went quiet. Not completely. Marcus was still scraping the grill, the dishwasher was still chugging, but there was a shift in the atmosphere, a collective intake of breath from the other customers who'd been pretending not to watch. The old man stared at her, at the $5, at her. "You don't understand." His voice was barely a whisper. "This might be all I have." "I know." Lena did know. She knew exactly what that felt like. "That's why you should keep it." "But you—" He looked around the diner, at her worn shoes, her too thin frame, the exhaustion that she wore like a second skin. "You need it too." "We all need it," Lena smiled, and it was real this time, not the customer service version. "But I have a job. I'll be okay. You take care of yourself out there, all right?" For a long moment, they just stood there. The old man's hand closed around the $5, holding it like it was precious, priceless. Tears rolled down his cheeks now, unchecked. "Lena Carter," he said finally, "I want you to remember this night. Can you do that for me?" It was a strange request. "I'm not likely to forget it." "Good." He reached out and squeezed her hand, brief and gentle. "Thank you. For seeing me. For—" His voice broke. "For treating me like I matter." "You do matter." "Not to most people." He released her hand and moved toward the door. Then he paused, looking back one more time. "You're a good person, Lena Carter. Don't let the world convince you otherwise. And then he was gone, disappearing into the rain and darkness like he'd never been there at all. Marcus came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. Did you seriously just give that homeless guy free food and his money back? Yeah. Lena picked up the empty coffee cup, the plate with its crumbs of toast. I did. You know that comes out of your tips if management finds out. I know. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. You're either the kindest person I've ever met or the dumbest. Probably both. He laughed. Actually laughed. Probably. Lena finished her shift at 6 a.m. when the morning crew came in and the diner transitioned from late-night refuge to early morning rush. She counted her tips in the break room, $63.47. Better than expected. Not enough, but better. She walked home through streets that were starting to wake up, past shops that were raising their metal shutters, past people heading to jobs they probably hated. Her feet hurt. Her back hurt. Her whole body hurt with the particular exhaustion of someone who'd been standing for 16 hours straight. But she felt something else, too. Something she couldn't quite name. Like she'd passed some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. 3 days later, she was $188 short on rent, and her landlord was calling twice a day. 5 days later, the pharmacy sent a final notice about her mother's medication. 7 days later, Lena was juggling payment plans and broken promises and the same impossible mathematics that never, ever worked out. And then, on day 9, everything changed. She was at Martha's, working another double, when Marcus called her to the phone. Some lawyer guy. Says it's urgent. Lena's heart dropped. Lawyers meant problems. Debt collectors, maybe, or some complication with her mother's care. She wiped her hands on her apron and took the phone with the resignation of someone who'd learned to expect bad news. This is Lena Carter. Ms. Carter, my name is Robert Hutchinson. I'm a senior partner at Hutchinson Marsh & Associates. I represent the estate of Arthur Whitmore. The name meant nothing to her. I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong person. No, Ms. Carter. I have exactly the right person. There was something strange in his voice. Excitement, maybe, or disbelief. Arthur Whitmore passed away 4 days ago. Before his death, he made certain arrangements regarding his estate, arrangements that concern you directly. Lena's grip tightened on the phone. I don't understand. Miss Carter, would it be possible for you to come to our offices tomorrow at 2 p.m.? There's a matter we need to discuss in person. I work tomorrow. I understand. However, I believe you'll want to make arrangements to attend this meeting. He paused. It's extremely important. Something in his tone made the hair on the back of Lena's neck stand up. Can you tell me what this is about? Not over the phone, but Ms. Carter. Another pause, longer this time. I think it's fair to tell you that your life is about to change in ways you cannot possibly imagine. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., our offices are at 1500 Market Street, 42nd floor. Can I count on you being there? Lena thought about her shift, about the tips she'd lose, about how much she needed every dollar, every cent. I'll be there, she heard herself say. Excellent, Miss Carter. One more thing. Yes. Do you remember a man you served at Martha's Diner approximately 9 days ago, an elderly gentleman? It was late at night, raining. You gave him coffee and toast. Lena's breath caught, the sad eyes, the $5 bill, the way he'd asked her to remember. Yes, she whispered. I remember. Good. Robert Hutchinson's voice was warm now, almost gentle. That man was Arthur Whitmore. And Miss Carter, he remembered you too. The line went dead. Lena stood there, phone in hand, her mind refusing to process what she'd just heard. Marcus was calling her. Table 6 needed water. Table 2 wanted their check. But his voice seemed to come from very far away. Arthur Whitmore. She didn't know the name, but something about it felt important, significant in a way she couldn't explain. Later, much later, she'd wonder why she didn't just Google it right then. Why she didn't pull out her phone and search for answers to questions she didn't even know how to ask yet. Maybe she was afraid. Or maybe some part of her understood that knowing too much too soon would make the next 24 hours unbearable. She worked the rest of her shift in a daze, She went home and kissed her mother's forehead and listened to Mama June talk about people who'd been dead for 20 years. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching shadows move across peeling paint, thinking about sad eyes and $5 bills, and the way kindness could feel like the most expensive thing in the world. At 1:45 p.m. the next day, Lena stood in front of a building made entirely of glass and steel and money. 1500 Market Street, the kind of place she'd never had reason to enter before. Security guards in the lobby, marble floors that reflected clouds, elevators that moved so smoothly she barely felt them rising. 42nd floor. The doors opened onto a reception area that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Everything was chrome and leather and the kind of expensive minimalism that screamed wealth louder than gold ever could. A woman behind the desk looked up, her expression professionally pleasant. "Can I help you?" "I'm Lena Carter. I have a meeting with Robert Hutchinson." The pleasant expression didn't change, but something flickered in the woman's eyes. Recognition, maybe, or curiosity. "Of course, Ms. Carter. He's expecting you. Please, follow me." They walked down a hallway lined with doors that probably hid corner offices and six-figure salaries. The receptionist knocked on one, heavy wood, brass nameplate, and opened it without waiting for an answer. "Ms. Carter is here." "Thank you, Jennifer. Please, Ms. Carter, come in." Robert Hutchinson was exactly what Lena expected. 60-something, silver hair, suit that cost more than her car. But his handshake was firm, and his smile was genuine. And when he gestured to a leather chair across from his desk, there was something in his manner that put her slightly at ease. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine." Lena perched on the edge of the chair, her bag clutched in her lap like a shield. "Mr. Hutchinson, what is this about?" He settled into his own chair, steepling his fingers. "Miss Carter, before we begin, I need to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you know who Arthur Whitmore was?" "No." The word came out too quickly. "I mean, you said he was the man from the diner, but I don't know anything about him." "You don't read the business section? Follow tech news, financial markets?" "I work 2 jobs and take care of my mother." Lena heard the defensiveness in her voice and tried to soften it. "I don't have time for much else." Robert Hutchinson nodded slowly. "That's what I thought. It's important, actually, that you didn't know. It makes everything cleaner." "Cleaner?" "Ms. Carter, Arthur Whitmore founded Whitmore Technologies in 1985. When he died 4 days ago, his personal fortune was estimated at $4.7 billion. That's billion, with a B. The number was so large it didn't seem real. Lena blinked. What does that have to do with me?" "Everything." Robert Hutchinson opened a file on his desk, but he didn't look at it. He kept his eyes on Lena. Mr. Whitmore was dying. He knew it. He had perhaps 6 months when we last spoke, and he wanted to conduct an experiment, I suppose you could call it. An experiment. He wanted to know if anyone would treat him with dignity when he had nothing. No name, no money, no power. Just an old, sick man who looked homeless. Robert's expression was hard to read. So he dressed in old clothes and went out into the city. Multiple nights, different locations, hotels, restaurants, shops, parks. Everywhere he went, he was dismissed, ignored, sometimes threatened. Security guards threw him out. Wait staff refused to serve him. He was invisible, Ms. Carter, completely invisible. Lena's throat was tight. She thought about the college kids at Martha's, their casual cruelty. The way they'd looked at the old man, at Arthur Whitmore, like he was garbage, something to be removed. "Until he walked into Martha's diner," Robert continued. "Until he met you." Lena shook her head. "I just served him coffee." "You did more than that. You saw him. You treated him like a human being. And when he tried to pay you, when he offered you what might have been his last $5, you gave it back." Robert's voice dropped. "Ms. Carter, do you have any idea what that meant to him?" Lena couldn't speak. Arthur Whitmore had 3 children, all adults, all successful in their own right. And do you know what they asked him during his final months? Robert's jaw tightened. Not, "How are you feeling, Dad?" Not, What can we do to make you comfortable? They asked about his will, about succession plans, about who would control the company. They circled him like vultures, and he saw exactly what they were, what they'd always been. That's awful, Lena whispered. It is, but it also clarified something for him. Blood doesn't make family, money doesn't make character, and legacy. Robert smiled slightly. Legacy isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn. He slid a document across the desk. Heavy paper, legal letterhead, multiple pages. This is Arthur Whitmore's last will and testament, updated 2 days after he met you, signed, witnessed, and completely ironclad. Robert's eyes never left Lena's face. Ms. Carter, Arthur Whitmore left his entire fortune to you. The words hung in the air like a hallucination. I'm sorry, Lena said faintly. I think I misheard you. You didn't, Robert tapped the document. The estate has been through probate. It's official. You are now the sole beneficiary of Arthur Whitmore's fortune. The company, the properties, the investments, the liquid assets, all of it, approximately $4.7 billion. It's yours. The room tilted. Or maybe Lena did. She gripped the arms of the chair, her knuckles white. That's impossible. He didn't know me. I gave him toast and coffee. That's all. That's everything. Robert's voice was gentle now. Ms. Carter, Arthur Whitmore was tested by life at its absolute end. And everyone failed, except you. You, who had nothing to gain. You, who couldn't afford to give anything away. You gave anyway, because it was right, because he was human, because dignity matters even when, especially when, no one's watching. Lena couldn't breathe. The numbers were too large, the situation too absurd. This didn't happen, not to people like her, not to waitresses with $47 in tips and mothers who forgot their names and rent that was always late. His children, she managed. What about them? They each received a personal item, a watch, a book, something sentimental. Robert's expression hardened. No money, no control, no power. Arthur's will was very specific about that. Oh, they'll fight it. They have to fight it. They're already trying. Robert allowed himself a small smile. They've hired 4 different law firms. They're claiming undue influence, mental incompetence, fraud, all of it. But Ms. Carter, I've been practicing law for 37 years. I've never seen a will more carefully constructed. Arthur knew exactly what he was doing. He documented everything, the experiment, the encounters, your interaction. He even had a private investigator verify your character afterward. Nothing invasive, he added quickly, seeing Lena's expression. Just confirming you were who you appeared to be. A good person in difficult circumstances. This is insane. Lena stood abruptly, the room spinning. I don't. Ms. Carter. Robert stood too. I understand this is overwhelming, but you need to understand something. This fortune, it comes with responsibility. Arthur didn't just give you money. He gave you the power to continue what you started in that diner, to see people the way you saw him, to create dignity where it's been stripped away, to prove that character matters more than inheritance. Lena looked at him, really looked at him, and she saw something in his face that surprised her. Belief. He believed in this. In her. In what Arthur Whitmore had done. What happens now? Her voice was barely a whisper. Now? Robert Hutchinson smiled. Now you decide what kind of legacy you want to build. Outside the office windows, Philadelphia stretched out in every direction. Millions of people, millions of stories, millions of moments where someone chose between kindness and convenience, between dignity and dismissal, between seeing and ignoring. Lena thought about her mother, about Martha's diner, about the $5 bills she'd pushed back across a table because some things mattered more than money. She thought about sad eyes and the way someone could be invisible until they weren't. And she thought about what came next. The news hit the media like a bomb 3 hours after Lena left Robert Hutchinson's office. She was on the bus heading back to her apartment, still numb, still unable to process what had just happened, when her phone started ringing. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Different number. Then again, and again. By the time she reached her stop, she had 17 missed calls. Lena Carter? A man with a camera was waiting at her building's entrance. Can you comment on the Whitmore inheritance? How does it feel to become a billionaire overnight? She pushed past him, her heart hammering. Another reporter materialized from a parked car, then another. Questions flew at her like projectiles. Did you know who Arthur Whitmore was? How long were you in a relationship with him? What do you say to his children who claim you manipulated a dying man? Lena fumbled with her keys, hands shaking so badly she dropped them twice. A woman with perfect hair and predatory eyes shoved a microphone in her face. Sources say you're just a waitress. Don't you think this fortune should go to Arthur's real family? The words hit like a slap. Real family. As if kindness to a stranger couldn't possibly earn what blood automatically deserved. As if everything had to make sense according to rules Lena had never been taught. She finally got the door open and slammed it shut behind her, sliding the deadbolt home with trembling fingers. Through the thin wood, she could hear them calling her name, their voices blending into a cacophony of accusation and hunger. Lena? Baby, is that you? Her mother's voice drifted from the living room, thin and confused. Why is it so loud out there? Lena leaned against the door, eyes closed, breathing hard. Then she straightened and walked into the living room where Mama June sat in her chair by the window, the same chair she'd occupied for the past 3 years as her mind slowly retreated from the present. It's nothing, Mama. Just some people confused about directions. Lena kissed her mother's forehead, a gesture so automatic she barely registered doing it. Did you eat lunch? I think so. Maybe. Mama June's eyes were distant, focused on something Lena couldn't see. Your father came by. He brought flowers. That's nice, Mama. Her father had been dead for 12 years. Lena's phone rang again. This time she recognized the number, Martha's Diner. She answered with a sense of dread. Lena, what the hell is going on? Marcus sounded panicked. There are reporters outside the diner. They're asking about you and some dead billionaire. They're saying you inherited billions of dollars. Please tell me this is some kind of mistake. Marcus, Is it true? Any of it? Lena looked at her mother, at the peeling wallpaper, at the secondhand furniture they'd bought from Goodwill. She thought about the impossible mathematics that had ruled her life for so long, the constant calculation of what she could afford to lose. I don't know what's true anymore, she said quietly. Jesus Christ. Marcus was silent for a moment. Lena, are you okay? The question nearly broke her. Of all the things people might ask about the money, about Arthur Whitmore, about what she planned to do with a fortune she couldn't comprehend, Marcus asked if she was okay. No, she admitted. I don't think I am. Do you need me to come over? No, I need to think. She ended the call and turned off her phone. The silence that followed felt almost violent in its completeness. That night, Lena didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg she'd been meaning to fix for 2 years, and tried to understand what had happened. Robert Hutchinson had given her documents, business cards, passwords to accounts she was afraid to access. He'd told her about board meetings and fiduciary responsibilities and corporate structures. The words had washed over her like a foreign language. At 3 a.m., the same time she'd normally be finishing a shift at Martha's, Lena finally opened her laptop and searched for Arthur Whitmore. The screen filled with results, thousands of them. Articles, obituaries, analysis pieces, financial reports. She clicked on the first one, from the Wall Street Journal. Tech pioneer Arthur Whitmore, dead at 72. Legacy in question after shocking will. She read the article slowly, her coffee growing cold beside her. Arthur Whitmore hadn't just been rich. He'd been a titan, a legend, the kind of man who appeared on magazine covers and gave keynote speeches at conferences where attendance cost more than Lena made in a year. He'd built Whitmore Technologies from nothing, revolutionized data security, employed over 50,000 people worldwide. And he'd left it all to her. The next article was worse. Whitmore's children contest, will, call inheritance, manipulation of vulnerable man. There was a photo. 3 people standing in front of what looked like a courthouse. A man in his 40s, handsome in that practiced way that came from expensive grooming and genetic luck. 2 women, younger, both beautiful, both wearing expressions of outraged grief. Lena read the quotes. Our father was not in his right mind in his final months. He was sick, confused, vulnerable. This woman, the son, Harrison Whitmore, practically spat the word, took advantage of a dying man. We will fight this travesty with every resource at our disposal. One of the daughters, Catherine. She's a nobody, a waitress. She saw an opportunity and she exploited it. Our father built an empire over 40 years. He had 3 children who loved him. And she thinks she can just take it all because she served him coffee? It's disgusting. The other daughter, Victoria. The will is clearly the result of undue influence. We have evidence that this Lena Carter, she made the name sound like an accusation, researched our father's condition and deliberately positioned herself to manipulate him. This isn't about money. This is about protecting our father's true legacy. Lena closed the laptop. She felt sick. The days that followed blurred together in a nightmare of legal meetings, phone calls, and reporters who seemed to materialize from thin air every time she left the apartment. Robert Hutchinson became her lifeline, the only person who seemed to understand the absurdity of her situation. "Don't read the articles," he advised during one meeting. "Don't engage with the media. Let me handle the legal challenges. Your only job right now is to decide if you want to accept this inheritance or walk away." "Walk away?" Lena stared at him. "Is that an option?" "Technically, yes. You could refuse the bequest. The fortune would then go to the secondary beneficiaries listed in Arthur's will, various charities and foundations." Robert leaned forward. "But Lena, Arthur didn't want that. He wanted you. Specifically you. And I think you should consider why before you make any decision." "I know why. Because I was kind to him once, one time. That doesn't make me qualified to run a billion-dollar company." "You think his children are qualified?" Robert's voice took on an edge. "Harrison Whitmore has been fired from 3 executive positions for embezzlement. Catherine's startup failed after she was accused of creating a hostile work environment. Victoria married a hedge fund manager, currently under investigation for insider trading. They're not good people, Lena. They're just people who happen to be born into wealth. And I just happen to be working at a diner." "No." Robert's expression softened. "You chose to be kind when it cost you something. That's not luck. That's character. And character is exactly what that company needs. But the Whitmores weren't going to accept defeat quietly. The first lawsuit came within a week. Whitmore v. Carter. Petition to invalidate last will and testament on grounds of testamentary incapacity and undue influence. The documents were 200 pages of legal assault, arguing that Arthur Whitmore had been mentally incompetent, that Lena had manipulated him, that the will violated public policy by disinheriting natural heirs, that the entire situation was a fraud that demanded immediate correction. Robert filed a motion to dismiss. The Whitmores filed a counter-motion. Depositions were scheduled. Discovery began. The legal machine ground forward with the inexorable momentum of a system built to protect wealth from anyone who hadn't inherited it. Lena tried to continue her normal life. She showed up for her shifts at Martha's, though customers now stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and resentment. Some left enormous tips, as if testing whether money would change her. Others left nothing, as if she no longer deserved it. One man asked for her autograph. A woman told her she should be ashamed of herself. Marcus was the only one who treated her the same. "You want the usual break room coffee, or should I brew something special for the billionaire?" He said it with a grin that took the sting out. "The usual is fine, and I'm not a billionaire yet. Maybe never." "You giving it up?" Lena poured herself coffee from the ancient pot, watching it drip like tar into her chipped mug. "I don't know. Some days I think I should. This isn't my world, Marcus. I don't belong in boardrooms and legal battles. I belong here." "Here?" Marcus looked around the diner, the cracked vinyl booths, the stained ceiling tiles, the menu board with letters missing. "Lena, I love this place. It's been good to me. But if you think you belong here because you're not good enough for something better, then you're wrong." "I didn't say I wasn't good enough." "You didn't have to." He turned back to the grill. "I've known you for 7 years. I've watched you run yourself into the ground trying to take care of your mom, trying to pay bills, trying to just survive. And you know what I've never seen you do? Believe you deserve better." The words hit harder than Lena expected. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Because Marcus was right. Some part of her had always accepted that struggle was her natural state, that wanting more was somehow greedy or unrealistic. Arthur Whitmore saw something in you, Marcus continued. Maybe you should figure out what that was before you decide to throw it away. That conversation was still echoing in Lena's mind when she attended her first board meeting at Whitmore Technologies. She'd tried to dress appropriately, a suit from Target, the nicest thing she owned, but standing in the gleaming conference room surrounded by men and women in clothes that cost thousands of dollars, she felt like a child playing dress-up. The board members watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. "Ms. Carter," a woman with steel gray hair and a voice to match spoke first. "I'm Margaret Chen, board chair. We appreciate you taking the time to attend this meeting, though I'm sure you understand that your position as," she paused delicately, "putative heir doesn't give you any authority over company operations until the legal challenges are resolved." "I understand." Lena's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. She cleared her throat. "I'm just here to observe." "Of course." Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Then perhaps you'll simply sit and let those of us who actually know how to run a company continue doing so." The meeting proceeded as if Lena wasn't there. They discussed quarterly earnings, market share, personnel decisions, strategic initiatives. The numbers were so large they lost all meaning. $400 million in quarterly revenue, 15% growth year over year, $2.3 billion in cash reserves. Lena tried to follow along, but the jargon was impenetrable. EBITDA, synergistic verticals, stakeholder optimization. They might as well have been speaking another language. Then a man in his 50s, Dennis something, VP of Operations, brought up workforce reductions. "We need to cut headcount by 8% to maintain margin targets. I'm proposing we start with the facilities staff, outsource cleaning and maintenance. It's a more efficient use of capital." Several board members nodded. Margaret made a note. Lena thought about Arthur Whitmore, how he'd been invisible when he looked like nothing, how dignity disappeared the moment wealth did. "Excuse me." Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room's corporate murmur. "You're talking about firing people?" Dennis looked at her with barely concealed irritation. "We're discussing workforce optimization, yes. The cleaning staff, the maintenance workers? Among others. It's a standard business practice, Ms. Carter. I wouldn't expect you to understand the complexities." Something hot and sharp flared in Lena's chest. "I understand perfectly. You want to fire the people no one sees because they're easy to cut, because they don't have MBAs or stock options or anyone who'll fight for them." The room went silent. Margaret's expression hardened. "Ms. Carter, this isn't a charity, it's a business. We have fiduciary responsibilities to shareholders. And what about responsibilities to the people who keep this company running?" Lena stood, surprised by her own boldness. "The people who clean your offices and fix your equipment and do all the work that lets you sit in these chairs and talk about workforce optimization like you're not destroying lives? This is highly inappropriate." Dennis's face flushed red. "You have no standing here, no authority. You're a waitress who got lucky, and you have no right." "She has every right." Robert Hutchinson's voice came from the doorway. No one had noticed him enter. "Ms. Carter is Arthur Whitmore's chosen heir. Until the courts rule otherwise, her opinion carries weight. I'd suggest you listen." The board members exchanged glances. Margaret's jaw tightened. "Mr. Hutchinson, we're trying to run a company. We can't make emotional decisions based on what? Compassion? Dignity? The values Arthur Whitmore actually believed in?" Robert walked into the room, his presence commanding attention. "I've represented Arthur for 20 years. I knew him better than anyone in this room, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that he would be disgusted by this conversation." "Arthur was a businessman," Dennis argued. "He made hard choices. He understood that treating people like numbers was a failure of leadership, not a mark of sophistication." Robert's voice was steel. "And if you continue down this path, you'll find that Ms. Carter has more legal standing than you think." The meeting deteriorated after that. Board members argued. Accusations flew. Margaret called for a recess, her face tight with suppressed fury. Lena found herself in an empty corridor, her heart racing, her hands shaking. Robert appeared beside her. You did well in there. I made enemies. You made a point. There's a difference. He studied her carefully. This is what it's going to be like, Lena. Every day, every decision. People who think they know better because they went to the right schools, worked at the right companies, wear the right suits, they'll underestimate you, dismiss you, try to push you aside. Maybe they're right to. Lena leaned against the wall, exhausted. Maybe I don't belong here. Or maybe Arthur Whitmore saw exactly what this company needed. Not someone who knows how to play corporate games, someone who remembers that businesses are made of people. Robert paused. The question is, do you have the courage to become what he believed you could be? Lena thought about her mother, about Martha's diner, about the $5 bill she'd returned because some things mattered more than survival. She thought about Arthur Whitmore's sad eyes and the way he'd asked her to remember. I don't know if I have that kind of courage, she admitted. Then maybe it's time to find out. The legal assault intensified. The Whitmores hired more lawyers, filed more motions, leaked more stories to the press. Each day brought new headlines, new attacks, new reasons why Lena Carter was unworthy, unqualified, illegitimate. Gold digger or good Samaritan? The Lena Carter controversy. Whitmore heirs present evidence of calculated manipulation. From diner to dynasty, the waitress who would be queen. The stories painted her as either a calculating predator or a naive fool, with no space for the truth between those extremes. Social media was worse. Anonymous accounts called her a thief, a con artist, a woman who'd seduced a dying man for his money. The comments ranged from creative cruelty to outright threats. Lena stopped reading after someone posted her address online and suggested that justice might need to be delivered personally. She hired security. She moved her mother to a safer apartment. She lived in a state of constant vigilance that left her exhausted and paranoid. And through it all, she kept thinking about Arthur Whitmore's question. Why are you kind to me? Because you're human, she'd answered. That's enough. But was it? Was one moment of kindness really worth this kind of war? The depositions were brutal. The Whitmore's lawyers were sharks in expensive suits, circling for blood. Miss Carter, isn't it true you researched Mr. Whitmore before you met him? No, I had no idea who he was. But you admit you served him for free. I gave him his money back. That's different. Why would you do that if you didn't know he was wealthy? What did you hope to gain? I wasn't trying to gain anything. He looked like he needed the money more than I did. How convenient. A perfectly selfless act with no witnesses. There were witnesses, other customers, my coworker, none of whom remember the incident with the clarity you claim. On and on it went. They twisted her kindness into calculation, her compassion into conspiracy. They suggested she'd somehow known who Arthur was, that she'd staged the entire encounter, that every word and gesture had been part of an elaborate con. By the third day of depositions, Lena wanted to scream, but then Harrison Whitmore took the stand for his deposition, and everything changed. Robert questioned him with surgical precision. Mr. Whitmore, when did you last visit your father before his death? Harrison shifted uncomfortably. I don't recall the exact date. Was it within the last month of his life? Possibly. The last week? I'd have to check my calendar. Robert produced a document. According to your father's hospice care records, you visited him once in his final month, for 20 minutes. Is that accurate? I was busy. I had business obligations. Of course. And during that 20-minute visit, what did you discuss? Harrison's jaw tightened. Family matters. Specifically, you asked about changes to his will, didn't you? I may have. That's a reasonable question when someone's dying. You brought a lawyer with you to your dying father's bedside with documents for him to sign. The room went silent. Harrison's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. Robert continued, relentless. You wanted him to sign over control of the company before he died, didn't you? To avoid estate taxes, you said. But really, you wanted to ensure you inherited everything before he could change his mind. That's not... I loved my father. Did you? Robert's voice was soft now, almost gentle. It was more devastating than anger. Did you ask him how he felt? What he was afraid of? What he needed? I didn't need to ask. I knew. But you didn't know that he was spending his final nights walking through the city dressed as a homeless man, testing whether anyone would treat him with dignity when he had nothing. You didn't know because you never looked at him closely enough to see anything beyond the fortune you were waiting to inherit. Harrison's face went white. His lawyers called for a recess. But the truth was already out there, documented in official testimony. Catherine's deposition was worse. Victoria's was devastating. By the time Robert finished, the Whitmore children had painted a picture of themselves that no jury would find sympathetic. Wealthy adults who'd seen their father as an ATM, who'd measured their love in inheritance percentages, who'd been too busy managing their own lives to notice his dying. The judge's ruling came 6 weeks later. After reviewing all evidence, depositions, and testimony, this court finds no basis for claims of testamentary incapacity or undue influence. Arthur Whitmore's will was executed with full knowledge and understanding of its implications. The document clearly reflects his intentional choices made without coercion or manipulation. The petition to invalidate is denied. The will stands as written. It was over. Legally, officially, irreversibly over. Lena Carter was now worth $4.7 billion. Robert called her from the courthouse, his voice warm with triumph. We won. Lena stood in her apartment, her old apartment, not the safer one she'd moved her mother to, and looked around at the life she was about to leave behind. The kitchen table with the wobbly leg, the second-hand couch, the walls she'd never gotten around to repainting. Yeah, she said softly. We won. But she didn't feel victorious. She felt terrified. That night, unable to sleep, Lena walked back to Martha's diner. It was 2 a.m., the exact time Arthur Whitmore had stumbled in from the rain all those weeks ago. The same booth where he'd sat was occupied by a young couple sharing cheese fries. The same fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The same smell of coffee and grease hung in the air. Marcus was working the grill. He looked up when she walked in, his expression unreadable. Heard the news. Congratulations. Thanks. Lena slid onto a stool at the counter. Can I get coffee? You can afford better coffee now. I know, but I want this coffee. He poured her a cup from the ancient pot, the same terrible brew she'd been drinking for 7 years. It tasted like home. They sat in silence for a while, the diner's late-night rhythm continuing around them. Finally, Marcus spoke. You scared? Terrified. Good. You should be. It means you understand what you're taking on. He refilled her cup. So what are you going to do with it? The money? The power? All of it? Lena thought about the board meeting, about the workforce optimization that was really just firing people who couldn't fight back. She thought about Arthur Whitmore's test and what it had revealed about the world. She thought about kindness and dignity and the cost of seeing people as human. I'm going to try, she said finally. I'm going to try to do what Arthur believed I could do. Build something that treats people like they matter, even when they look like nothing, especially then. Marcus smiled. That sounds like a lot of work. It does. You'll need help. I will. Well, he topped off his own coffee cup. I make a decent operations manager once you teach me the corporate vocabulary, and I'm guessing you could use someone who'll tell you the truth instead of what you want to hear. Alina looked at him, this man who'd been her coworker and friend through years of impossible choices and mathematical failures. Are you seriously offering to leave Martha's to work for me? I'm offering to help you change what a company can be. Martha's will survive without me. But what you're trying to do, that needs people who remember where they came from. The door chimed. A woman came in from the rain, soaked and shivering. Without thinking, Lena grabbed a towel from the service station and brought it to her. The woman looked surprised, then grateful. Thank you. I wasn't expecting kindness tonight. You're welcome, Lena said, and then softer. It doesn't cost as much as people think. Marcus watched this exchange with a knowing expression. When the woman moved to a booth, he turned back to Lena. You're going to be good at this, not because you know business, because you know people. I hope you're right. I'm always right. It's annoying, but accurate. Lena laughed, and it felt like the first genuine laugh she'd had in weeks. She finished her terrible coffee, said goodbye to Marcus, and walked out into the pre-dawn darkness. Tomorrow, she'd go to Whitmore Technologies headquarters. She'd walk into that glass tower as its new owner. She'd face the board members who'd dismissed her, the employees who were watching to see what kind of leader she'd become, the world that was waiting for her to fail. But tonight, she was still just Lena Carter, a waitress who'd made a choice that cost her $5 and earned her $5 billion, a woman who'd seen a human being when everyone else saw nothing. And somehow, that was going to have to be enough. The glass tower of Whitmore Technologies looked different in daylight, less intimidating somehow, though Lena suspected that was because she was no longer a visitor being escorted to the 42nd floor. Now she was walking through the main entrance as its owner, and the security guards who'd checked her ID on previous visits simply nodded and stepped aside. She wasn't alone. Marcus walked beside her, uncomfortable in a new suit but steady in a way that made Lena grateful she'd convinced him to take the leap. Robert Hutchinson flanked her other side, his briefcase full of documents that would officially transfer control of the company to her today. "You ready?" Robert asked as they approached the elevators. "No." Lena pressed the button for the executive floor. "But I don't think that matters anymore." The elevator ride felt interminable. Marcus kept tugging at his collar. Robert checked his phone 3 times. Lena focused on breathing and not throwing up. When the doors opened, Margaret Chen was waiting. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Lena could see the calculation behind her eyes. The board chair was measuring her, trying to determine how much resistance would be required to maintain the status quo. "Ms. Carter, welcome." Margaret extended a hand. The handshake was firm, businesslike, and contained absolutely no warmth. "The board is assembled in the main conference room. We're prepared to brief you on current operations and discuss the transition process." "Thank you, Margaret." Lena kept her voice level. "But before we do that, I'd like to tour the facilities, all of them, starting with the ground floor." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. "The ground floor? You mean the lobby?" "I mean everything. Facilities management, maintenance offices, the cafeteria, mailroom. I want to see how this company actually operates, not just what happens in conference rooms." "Ms. Carter, I hardly think—" "It's not a request." Lena said it quietly, but there was steel underneath. "I own this company now. I get to decide what my first day looks like." For a moment, Margaret looked like she might argue. Then something shifted in her expression. A recalculation, a recognition that the balance of power had fundamentally changed. "Of course. I'll arrange for someone from facilities to give you a tour." "I'd prefer you show me yourself." Margaret's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Very well." They descended to the ground floor, then lower, into the operational spaces most executives never visited. The maintenance offices were cramped and poorly lit, tucked into corners of the building like something to be hidden. The break room had a single ancient microwave and a coffee maker that looked older than Lena. The facilities staff watched them with the wariness of people accustomed to being invisible. When Lena introduced herself, most seemed shocked that someone from the executive floor knew their names existed, let alone wanted to know them personally. "How long have you worked here?" Lena asked a woman named Rosa, who was restocking cleaning supplies. Rosa glanced at Margaret nervously before answering. 15 years, ma'am." "And in 15 years, has anyone from leadership ever asked you what the company could do better?" The question seemed to confuse her. "No, ma'am. We just do our jobs." "What would you change if you could change anything?" Rosa looked at Margaret again, clearly uncertain whether honesty was safe. Margaret's expression was stone. "The equipment is old," Rosa said finally. "The vacuum cleaners break constantly. We put in requisition orders, but they never get approved. So we spend twice as long doing the same work, and it's never quite as clean as it should be." "Why aren't the requisitions approved?" Lena turned to Margaret. "Budget constraints? We allocate funds to highest priority needs first." "And clean workspaces aren't high priority?" "They're important, but how much does a commercial vacuum cleaner cost? A good one?" Margaret hesitated. "I'd have to check." "Roughly." "Perhaps 800. Lena did the math in her head. The company had $2.3 billion in cash reserves. They'd spent $1.2 million on the board retreat last quarter. She'd seen that line item in the documents Robert gave her. but they couldn't approve an $800 vacuum cleaner. Rosa, you'll have new equipment by the end of the week. Make a list of everything you need. Everything. Send it directly to me. Lena pulled out one of the business cards Robert had made for her. Her name looked strange, printed in professional font. Lena Carter, CEO, Whitmore Technologies. Rosa took the card like it might disappear. Thank you, ma'am. Call me Lena. They continued the tour. In the cafeteria, Lena learned that the food service workers hadn't received a raise in 3 years, despite the company's record profits. In the mailroom, she discovered that the overnight shift operated without proper heating, and employees brought blankets from home to stay warm. In the IT support basement, technicians worked in windowless spaces with air so stale it hurt to breathe. With each revelation, Lena felt her anger building. Not the hot, explosive kind, but something colder and more dangerous. These weren't oversights, they were choices. Someone had decided that the people who kept this building functioning weren't worth investing in. By the time they returned to the executive floor, Margaret's composure had developed hairline cracks. I assume you have questions about what you saw, the board chair said stiffly. Just one. How did Arthur Whitmore let this happen? Margaret's expression flickered. Mr. Whitmore was focused on strategic growth. Operational details were delegated to appropriate management. So he didn't know. He trusted his leadership team to make sound decisions. And you decided that people who clean toilets and fix computers don't deserve the same consideration as people who attend board meetings. Lena kept her voice level. That's not sound decision-making, Margaret. That's cruelty dressed up as efficiency. Ms. Carter, you're being naive. This is how businesses operate. You can't run a successful company by giving everyone everything they ask for. I'm not talking about giving them everything. I'm talking about basic dignity, functioning equipment, living wages, safe working conditions. Lena stepped closer. These people make this company possible. They're not line items to be optimized. They're human beings who deserve to be treated as such. With all due respect, you've been the owner for exactly 3 hours. You don't understand the complexities. I understand that Arthur Whitmore didn't leave his fortune to his children because they forgot people matter. And I understand that this company has been operating on the same principle. That ends now. The conference room went silent. The board members who'd gathered during the tour watched with expressions ranging from discomfort to disbelief. Dennis from operations looked like he wanted to argue, but didn't quite dare. A younger executive Lena hadn't met yet seemed almost hopeful. What exactly are you proposing? Margaret's voice had gone cold. I'm not proposing anything. I'm implementing changes. Effective immediately, we're conducting a comprehensive audit of working conditions for every non-executive employee. We're establishing a minimum wage floor of $22 an hour for everyone in this building. We're creating a worker feedback system that reports directly to my office, and we're canceling the planned workforce reductions. That's financially irresponsible. Dennis found his courage. We have margins to maintain. Shareholder expectations are less important than employee welfare. Lena cut him off. This company generates billions in revenue. We can afford to treat people decently and still be profitable. If you can't figure out how to do that, then maybe you're not as good at your job as your salary suggests. Dennis's face flushed red. This is absurd. You're going to run this company into the ground with your bleeding heart. Dennis? Robert Hutchinson's voice cut through the tension like a knife. I'd be very careful about how you finish that sentence. Ms. Carter has the full authority to restructure leadership as she sees fit. I'd suggest you consider whether you want to be part of the new direction or looking for employment elsewhere. The threat hung in the air. Dennis closed his mouth. Margaret's expression revealed nothing, but Lena could see her mind working, adjusting strategy, calculating angles. If there are no other objections, Lena said into the silence, I'd like to meet with department heads individually this week. I want to understand what's working and what isn't. I want honest feedback, not corporate speak. And I want to start building the kind of company Arthur Whitmore actually believed in, not the one his leadership team created while he was focused elsewhere. She gathered the documents Robert had brought, feeling the weight of signatures that had transferred billions of dollars and 50,000 employees into her custody. Her hands didn't shake. Not anymore. One more thing, she added, turning back to face the room. Anyone here who can't accept these changes, who thinks treating workers with dignity is naive or financially irresponsible, I'll accept your resignation today with a generous severance package. But if you stay, I expect full commitment to this new direction. Half measures and sabotage won't be tolerated. Am I clear? No one spoke. The silence itself was an answer. Good, then let's get to work. The first week was brutal. 3 executives resigned, including Dennis. Margaret stayed, but her cooperation was grudging at best. Rumors spread through the building that the new CEO was either a visionary or a disaster waiting to happen, with no consensus on which. Lena worked 18-hour days trying to understand systems that had been built over 40 years. Marcus became her operational anchor, translating corporate jargon into plain English and identifying which recommendations from department heads were genuine and which were designed to make her fail. "This proposal from marketing is garbage," he told her during one late-night session, tossing a stack of papers across her desk. "They're padding the budget by 40% and hoping you won't notice because you're new." "How can you tell?" "Because I learned to read these reports the same way I learned to know when someone's trying to stiff me on a tip. Pattern recognition. These numbers don't make sense unless someone's either incompetent or lying. Given that they've been doing this job for years, I'm betting on lying." Lena learned to trust Marcus's instincts. She also learned that being the owner didn't mean people told you the truth. It meant they told you what they thought you wanted to hear, or what would benefit them most. The changes she'd announced began slowly. New equipment arrived for the facility's staff. Wages increased. The worker feedback system launched with anonymous reporting to protect employees from retaliation. And gradually, cautiously, people began to believe she meant what she said. But resistance came from unexpected quarters. "You're making us look bad." The complaint came from James Reeves, CEO of a competing tech company, during an industry event Lena was obligated to attend. Paying workers $20 an hour minimum? Giving them all this extra consideration? You're setting a precedent that makes the rest of us look like villains. "Maybe you are villains," Lena replied pleasantly. James's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're naive. This little experiment of yours will fail, and when it does, the industry will breathe a collective sigh of relief. We don't need bleeding hearts disrupting decades of established practice. Established practice built on treating people as expendable. Established practice that built trillion-dollar industries and made this country great." James leaned closer, his voice dropping. "You're a waitress playing CEO. Everyone knows it. They're waiting for you to fail. And you will, because you don't understand how this game is actually played." The words stung because they touched a fear Lena carried every day. She didn't have an MBA. She hadn't gone to business school. She was making decisions based on instinct and values rather than case studies and proven models. But then she thought about Arthur Whitmore, conducting his test in the streets of Philadelphia, about how everyone who understood the game had failed to see him as human, about how the only person who'd passed was someone who didn't know the rules. "Maybe the game needs new players," she told James. He laughed. "We'll see how long your idealism lasts when the quarterly reports come in." The quarterly reports came in 6 weeks later. Revenue was down 2%. Operating costs were up 8%. The board meeting to discuss the numbers had the atmosphere of an execution. "These results are unacceptable." Margaret presented the figures with barely concealed satisfaction. "Ms. Carter's changes have cost us $180 million in additional expenses this quarter alone. If this trend continues, we'll be operating at a loss within the year." "We're also up 15% in employee satisfaction," Lena countered. "Turnover is down 22%. And productivity in facilities management and IT support has increased by 30% because people actually have the equipment and compensation to do their jobs properly." Employee satisfaction doesn't pay dividends. Dennis's replacement, a man named Walter Chen, who'd seemed reasonable until now, frowned at his tablet. "Shareholders care about returns, not how happy the janitors are." "The janitors are the reason this building functions," Lena kept her voice level. "And the IT staff, and the cafeteria workers. Every single person who makes it possible for executives to sit in comfortable chairs and make decisions." "That's a lovely sentiment," Margaret said coldly. "But sentiment doesn't sustain a business. We need to make adjustments. Scale back some of these initiatives. Return to sustainable practices." You mean fire people and cut wages? I mean operate responsibly. You've had your experiment. The numbers prove it's not working. Lena looked around the table at faces that ranged from sympathetic to hostile. She thought about giving up, about accepting that maybe everyone was right and she didn't belong here, that waitresses couldn't be CEOs and kindness was naive and the world ran on calculations that didn't include humanity in the equation. Then Marcus caught her eye. He didn't say anything, but his expression was clear. Don't back down. We're not making adjustments, Lena said finally. We're staying the course. 1 quarter isn't enough data to judge whether this approach works. Arthur Whitmore built this company over decades. I'm asking for the same patience to rebuild it the right way. You're not Arthur Whitmore, Walter said. No, I'm not. But I'm the person he chose, and I'm going to trust that he saw something the rest of you don't. The meeting ended in stalemate. No votes were taken, no decisions were made. But Lena could feel the pressure building, the expectation that she would crack under the weight of numbers and professional expertise. That night she visited her mother. Mama June was having a good day, which meant she recognized Lena and could hold a conversation that stayed mostly in the present. You look tired, baby. Mama June patted the couch beside her. Come sit. Tell me what's wrong. Lena settled next to her mother, feeling the exhaustion in her bones. I'm trying to do something good, Mama, but everyone keeps telling me I'm doing it wrong. What are you trying to do? Treat people decently, pay them fairly, give them dignity. Lena laughed softly. Apparently that's controversial. Your father used to say that the world runs on people forgetting other people are human. Mama June's voice was distant but clear. He said the minute you start seeing people as problems or profits or anything other than people, you've lost something important. I don't remember him saying that. You were young. He said a lot of things you don't remember. She squeezed Lena's hand. But he'd be proud of you, fighting for something that matters. What if I'm fighting for something impossible? Then you'll fail doing something worthwhile instead of succeeding at something empty. Mama June smiled. That's not such a bad way to fail. The words stayed with Lena. She repeated them to herself during long meetings where numbers were weaponized against compassion, during confrontations with board members who couldn't understand why she wouldn't prioritize margins over people, during late nights when she questioned whether she was destroying Arthur Whitmore's legacy instead of honoring it. And slowly, things began to change. It started small. A facilities worker named Tom sent her an email through the new feedback system. His daughter had asthma, and the health insurance improvements Lena had implemented meant he could finally afford her medication. He wanted to say thank you. Then an IT technician named Sarah reported that the new equipment and better working conditions meant she'd been able to solve a security vulnerability that had existed for months. The fix saved the company from a potential breach that could have cost millions. Then, cafeteria workers began making suggestions for improving service, ideas they'd never felt comfortable sharing before. Several suggestions were implemented, and customer satisfaction increased. Small victories. Incremental improvements. Nothing that would show up dramatically in quarterly reports, but everything that began shifting the culture of the company from the ground up. 3 months after taking control, Lena received a call from an unexpected source. Miss Carter, this is Sarah Mitchell from the New York Times. I'm working on a feature about your leadership at Whitmore Technologies. Would you be willing to speak with me? Lena's first instinct was to refuse. The media had not been kind to her, but Robert advised her to accept. Control the narrative, he said. Let them hear your side directly instead of through rumors and leaked board memos. The interview took place in Lena's office, which she'd deliberately kept modest. No expensive art, no mahogany furniture. Just functional space with windows that looked out over the city. Sarah Mitchell was younger than Lena expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Let's start with the obvious question, Sarah said. Why did Arthur Whitmore leave his fortune to you? Lena had answered this question dozens of times, but she tried to make it sound fresh. Because I treated him like a human being when no one else would. That's the public story. But there must be more to it. One act of kindness, and you inherit billions. One act that revealed character. That's what Arthur was testing for. Whether anyone would see him as human when he looked like nothing. And you were the only one who passed? In his experience, yes. Sarah made notes. Your employees love you, at least the ones I've talked to, but your board thinks you're a disaster. Your competitors think you're naive. Industry analysts are predicting the company will struggle under your leadership. How do you respond to that? Lena considered her words carefully. I think we measure success differently. They're measuring quarterly reports. I'm measuring whether people can afford their children's medication, whether workers are treated with dignity, whether this company creates value for everyone involved, not just shareholders. That's idealistic. It's also possible. We're proving it's possible. Are you? Sarah looked at her notes. Your revenue is down. Costs are up. The stock price has dropped 12% since you took over. Short-term pain for long-term gain. Building a sustainable company culture takes time. But you're asking shareholders to be patient while you experiment with their investments. That's a big ask. Arthur Whitmore asked me to honor his vision, to build something that mattered beyond profit margins. I'm doing that. If shareholders can't see past the next quarter, then maybe they're investing in the wrong company. Sarah's eyebrows rose. That's a bold stance. It's an honest one. The article published 2 weeks later under the headline, The $4.7 billion Experiment, Can Kindness Build a Company? It was surprisingly balanced. Sarah Mitchell presented both sides, the skeptics who thought Lena was destroying value, and the workers who felt seen and valued for the first time in their careers. She included quotes from board members and competitors, but also from employees whose lives had concretely improved. The response was overwhelming. Some readers called Lena naive, others called her inspiring, but everyone was talking about Whitmore Technologies in ways that transcended stock prices and quarterly reports. And then something unexpected happened. Applications to work at Whitmore Technologies increased by 300%. Talented engineers and managers who'd been at other companies began reaching out, asking about positions. The reputation of being a company that treated people well became a recruitment advantage. We're getting resumes from people at Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Marcus told her, barely containing his excitement. People who are tired of being cogs in massive machines. They want to work somewhere that actually gives a damn about them. The next quarterly report was better. Revenue stabilized. Costs remained higher, but were offset by increased productivity and decreased turnover. The company wasn't as profitable as it had been, but it was sustainable. And more importantly, it was becoming the kind of workplace Arthur Whitmore had envisioned. But the real test came from an unexpected direction. Harrison Whitmore requested a meeting. Lena almost refused. Arthur's son had spent months trying to destroy her in court, painting her as a gold digger who'd manipulated a dying man. But curiosity won out. They met in a neutral location, a coffee shop that was determinedly ordinary, the kind of place where no one would recognize either of them. Harrison looked different than he had in his deposition. Older, somehow. Tired. He ordered coffee and sat across from Lena with the careful posture of someone trying to maintain dignity in a situation that had stripped most of it away. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. "I wasn't sure I would." Lena stirred sugar into her coffee. "You spent considerable time and money trying to prove I manipulated your father." "I know. I was wrong." The admission seemed to cost him something. "I've been reading about what you're doing with the company, the changes you're making." And I think I finally understand why he chose you." Harrison looked out the window at people passing by. "My father used to talk about building something meaningful, about corporate responsibility and treating workers fairly. I thought it was just talk, something he said to feel good about himself while the company made him rich. But it wasn't. No, he meant it. He just got too far removed from the actual operations to see that the company had lost its way." Harrison turned back to Lena. "I failed him. So did my sisters. We saw him as a source of wealth instead of a person. And when he died, we proved we'd learned nothing about what actually mattered." Lena didn't know what to say. She'd expected many things from this meeting: anger, continued legal threats, attempts to negotiate, but not honesty. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you deserve to know that at least one of his children finally understands what he was trying to teach us." Harrison's expression was raw. "And because I want to apologize. Not just for the lawsuits, but for everything. for being the kind of son who made him feel like he needed to test the world before he could trust anyone. Harrison, you don't have to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed you to know. He stood, leaving his coffee untouched. What you're building at Whitmore Technologies, that's my father's real legacy. Not the fortune, not the empire. The idea that business can be done without forgetting people are human. Don't let anyone convince you to abandon that. He left before Lena could respond. She sat alone in the coffee shop, processing the conversation, trying to reconcile the man she'd just talked to with the one who'd called her a gold digger in court. People were complicated. Even the ones who seemed irredeemable had the capacity for growth, for recognition, for change. Arthur Whitmore had understood that. It's why he'd conducted his test, why he'd wanted to know if kindness still existed in a world that had forgotten to value it. Lena finished her coffee and walked back to Whitmore Technologies. The building looked the same, but she saw it differently now. Not as a glass tower of corporate power, but as a place where 50,000 people spent their days, where lives were lived and futures were built, where dignity mattered as much as profit. She had so much more to do. Systems to change, cultures to shift, resistance to overcome. The board would continue pushing back. Competitors would keep predicting her failure. Analysts would question every decision that prioritized people over margins. But she also had workers who believed in her, allies like Marcus who understood what she was building. And somewhere, maybe, Arthur Whitmore was watching and feeling vindicated that his test had revealed exactly what he'd hoped to find. That one person could make a difference. That kindness wasn't weakness. That legacy was earned through character, not inherited through blood. Lena Carter took the elevator to the executive floor, ready for whatever came next. The elevator doors opened just as Lena's phone rang. Margaret Chen's name flashed on the screen with an urgency that made Lena's stomach tighten. "We have a problem," Margaret said without preamble. "Conference room 3. Now." Lena found half the board already assembled, their faces grim. Marcus stood near the window, his arms crossed, looking like he wanted to punch something. Robert Hutchinson was reviewing documents with the focused intensity of a lawyer preparing for battle. "What's going on?" Lena asked. Margaret turned her laptop to face the room. On the screen was an article from TechCrunch, published less than an hour ago. The headline hit like a sledgehammer. Whitmore Technologies faces hostile takeover attempt by Consolidated Digital Systems. Lena's breath caught. "What?" "CDS has been quietly buying up shares for the past 6 weeks," Robert explained, his voice tight. "They now control 31% of the company. They're pushing for an emergency shareholder vote to replace you as CEO and install their own leadership team." "They can't do that. I own the majority." "You own the majority of Arthur's personal shares, which represents 47% of the company. But CDS has been buying from other shareholders, including some institutional investors who are unhappy with recent performance." Robert pulled up another document. "If they can convince just 20% more shareholders to vote with them, they'll have control." The room spun slightly. Lena gripped the edge of the table. "Who's behind this?" "James Reeves." Margaret's voice carried something that might have been respect. "The CEO you insulted at the industry event. CDS is one of his subsidiary companies. He's been planning this since that conversation." Lena remembered James's words. "You're a waitress playing CEO. Everyone knows it. They're waiting for you to fail." He hadn't been waiting. He'd been orchestrating. "What are our options?" she asked. "Fight or fold," Margaret said bluntly. "Fighting means convincing shareholders that your vision is worth supporting, despite the financial performance. Folding means negotiating a buyout and walking away with your fortune intact. Walking away isn't an option. Then you need to prepare for the fight of your life." Robert spread papers across the table. "The shareholder vote is in 3 weeks. We need to contact every major investor, present a compelling case for why they should support you, and counter every argument CDS will make about your incompetence." "I'm not incompetent." "I know that, you know that. But James Reeves has spent 6 weeks building a narrative that you're destroying shareholder value with your social experiment. He's got financial analysts, industry experts, and media contacts all primed to support his takeover. He's painting himself as the responsible adult coming to save a company from an unqualified waitress who got lucky." The word stung every time someone used it as a weapon. Waitress, as if serving people food was somehow less dignified than serving them PowerPoint presentations. What do the numbers say? Lena asked quietly. Honestly, are we performing well enough to justify keeping me as CEO? Robert and Margaret exchanged glances. Finally, Margaret spoke. Financially? No, not yet. Your initiatives have cost us profitability in the short term. Long-term projections look better, but long-term doesn't win shareholder votes. They want returns now. So he's right. I am destroying value. You're building something different. Marcus's voice cut through the defeated atmosphere. Value isn't just profit margins. It's employee retention, company culture, brand reputation. The New York Times article generated more positive press than this company's had in 5 years. Applications are up. The best talent in the industry wants to work here. That's value too. Just try explaining that to shareholders who've lost 12% of their investment. Margaret's tone was dry. They don't care about positive press. They care about dividends and stock prices. Then we make them care. Lena straightened, feeling something hard and determined settle in her chest. We show them that the company Arthur Whitmore built is worth more than quarterly reports. That treating people with dignity isn't just morally right, it's strategically smart. That we're playing a longer game than James Reeves understands. That's a beautiful speech, Margaret said. But speeches don't win votes. Data does. Strategy does. And right now, CDS has better data and a clearer strategy than we do. Then we get better data. Lena turned to Marcus. You said productivity is up in facilities and IT. By how much? Facilities is up 30%. It is up 25%. Employee satisfaction across all departments is up an average of 35%. And turnover? Down 22% overall. In critical technical positions, it's down 40%. Lena looked at Robert. What does it cost to recruit and train a senior engineer? Approximately $180,000 when you factor in recruiting fees, onboarding, and the productivity loss during the learning curve. And we've retained how many engineers who would have otherwise left? Marcus checked his tablet. Based on historical turnover rates, we should have lost approximately 43 senior technical employees this quarter. We lost 7. Lena did the math. So we saved roughly $6.5 million in recruitment and training costs alone. Robert's eyes sharpened. That's a compelling data point. It's one data point. Margaret was unmoved. You need a comprehensive case, and you need it in 3 weeks. Then we have work to do. The next 3 weeks were the most intense of Lena's life. She barely slept, surviving on coffee and determination. Robert assembled a team of analysts to build their case. Marcus coordinated with department heads to gather performance metrics. Lena herself reached out to every major shareholder, making her case person by person. Some meetings went well. A pension fund manager in Boston listened thoughtfully to her presentation and promised to consider her position. A tech entrepreneur who'd made her fortune in the 90s told Lena she reminded her of herself and committed her shares immediately, but others were brutal. You're asking me to bet millions on your feelings, a hedge fund manager told her coldly. Feelings don't pay returns. James Reeves has a proven track record. You have a social experiment and declining profits. I have a company that's becoming more valuable every day through talent retention and cultural transformation. Cultural transformation? He laughed. That's MBA nonsense. I want numbers that go up, not employee satisfaction scores. Lena tried a different approach. What if I told you that employee satisfaction directly correlates with innovation and productivity? That companies with higher engagement outperform their competitors by 147% in earnings per share? I'd say you're quoting statistics without understanding causation versus correlation. Good companies can afford to have happy employees. That doesn't mean happy employees create good companies. He stood, signaling the meeting's end. I'm voting with CDS. I'd advise you to accept the inevitable and negotiate a favorable exit while you still can. Each rejection felt like a small death. Lena would return to the office, and Marcus would have coffee waiting, and they'd review what went wrong, adjust the pitch, prepare for the next meeting. You're doing better than you think, Marcus told her after a particularly devastating call. You've secured 23% of the undecided shares. That's more than Robert expected. It's not enough. We need at least 35% to guarantee CDS can't win the vote. Then we get 35%. But as the deadline approached, the math remained stubbornly unfavorable. CDS had 31% confirmed. Lena had 47% from Arthur's shares plus 23% from shareholders she'd convinced. That left 19% undecided. If most of that went to CDS, she'd lose control of the company. The media coverage intensified. Business networks ran countdown specials. Will the Waitress CEO survive? Became a headline template. Commentators debated whether Arthur Whitmore had been a visionary or a fool. Opinion pieces argued both sides with the passionate certainty of people who had no actual stake in the outcome. Through it all, Lena kept thinking about the diner, about Arthur Whitmore's sad eyes, about the choice she'd made to return $5 that had cost her everything and given her everything. Had she made the right choice? Would Arthur want her to fight this hard to keep control, or would he understand if she walked away? She got her answer from an unexpected source. Victoria Whitmore, Arthur's younger daughter, the one who'd been most vicious during the legal challenges, requested a meeting. Unlike Harrison's coffee shop confession, Victoria wanted to meet at Whitmore Technologies, in Arthur's old office that Lena had been avoiding since she took control. The office was exactly as Arthur had left it. Books on entrepreneurship and philosophy, photos of the company's early days, a desk that had witnessed 40 years of decisions. Victoria stood by the window, looking out at the city her father had watched while building his empire. "Thank you for seeing me," Victoria said without turning around. "I wasn't sure I would." Lena stayed near the door, uncertain. "I don't blame you. I said terrible things about you." Victoria finally turned, and Lena was startled by how much she looked like Arthur. Same bone structure, same sad eyes. "I convinced myself you were a con artist because it was easier than admitting my father didn't trust us with his legacy." "Victoria, let me finish, please." Victoria's voice cracked slightly. "I've been reading about what you're doing, the changes, the way you're fighting to keep control, even though it would be easier and more profitable to just sell to CDS and walk away a billionaire. Your father wanted something specific. I'm trying to honor that. You're doing more than honoring it. You're living it." Victoria moved away from the window, closer to Lena. "My father used to tell us stories about when the company was small, when he knew every employee's name, when he could see the impact of his decisions on real people's lives. But as the company grew, he lost that connection. He became disconnected from the human cost of corporate decisions. The night he died, he left me a letter. I only read it recently. I couldn't face it before." Victoria pulled an envelope from her purse. He wrote that he'd spent his final months conducting an experiment, testing whether kindness still existed in a world that had taught him that everything had a price. He said he'd found his answer in a diner at 2 a.m., from a woman who gave him back $5 because she saw him as human rather than opportunity. Lena's throat tightened. He wrote that he was leaving his fortune to you not to punish us, but to show us what we'd failed to learn. That character matters more than inheritance. That dignity is more valuable than profit. That legacy is built through compassion, not accumulation. Victoria's eyes were wet. And then he wrote something that I can't stop thinking about. He said, "If my children learn from this, then both my experiment and my life will have meant something. If they don't, then at least the world will have one more person who understands what I tried to teach them." "I don't know if I understand anything," Lena admitted. "I'm making this up as I go. Fighting battles I don't know how to win against people who are better at this than I'll ever be." "That's what makes you the right person." Victoria smiled through her tears. "You're not better at corporate warfare. You're better at being human, and that's what this company needs. James Reeves is going to take it away from me. Not if I can help it." Victoria's expression hardened into something that reminded Lena powerfully of Arthur. "I still own 4% of the company, shares my father left me personally, separate from the main estate. I was planning to vote with CDS because I was angry and bitter and wanted you to fail, but I'm not going to do that anymore. You have my support, completely. 4%. It wasn't enough to guarantee victory, but combined with the shares Lena had already secured, it might be enough to push them over the threshold. "Why?" Lena asked. "Why now?" Because you're fighting for something my father believed in. Because you've proven you're not a con artist or an opportunist. You're just someone who was kind to a stranger, and now you're trying to build something meaningful out of that kindness. Victoria stepped closer. And because I'm tired of being the kind of person my father was disappointed in. Maybe it's too late to change who I was, but it's not too late to change who I'm going to be. She left the envelope with Lena, Arthur's final letter to his daughter, full of wisdom that came too late, but perhaps not completely in vain. Lena read it alone in Arthur's office, feeling his presence in every word, understanding more clearly what he'd been trying to accomplish. This wasn't just about money or companies or corporate control. It was about whether kindness could survive in a system designed to reward ruthlessness, whether people could be valued over profits, whether one person's choice to see another human being could ripple outward into something larger, something transformative. The shareholder vote took place on a gray Thursday morning in a hotel ballroom that felt more like a courtroom. Shareholders filled rows of chairs, their faces revealing nothing. Lena sat at a table with Robert and Marcus, while across the aisle, James Reeves commanded his own table with the confidence of someone who'd already counted his victory. The proceedings were formal, procedural, dense with corporate language that made Lena's head hurt. Presentations were made. CDS argued that new leadership was necessary to restore profitability and shareholder value. They had charts showing declining stock prices, increased operational costs, reduced margins. Then it was Lena's turn. She stood, her hands slightly shaking, and faced a room full of people who held her future in their voting power. She had a prepared presentation. Robert and his team had worked on it for days. But looking at those faces, she knew that data points and financial projections wouldn't change minds. So she told them a story instead. 9 months ago, I was a waitress working a double shift at a diner in Philadelphia. I had $47 in my pocket and I was $188 short on rent. An old man came in from the rain, soaked and shaking, and tried to pay for coffee and toast with a $5 bill that might have been all he had in the world. Everyone in that diner looked at him and saw a problem, someone to ignore or remove. I looked at him and saw a person who needed kindness. The room was silent. Even James Reeves seemed uncertain where this was going. I gave him back his $5 because some things matter more than money. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know that simple act would change my life. I just knew that treating people with dignity was more important than 57 cents profit on a cup of coffee. Lena's voice strengthened. Arthur Whitmore left me his fortune because in that moment, I proved something he needed to know. That kindness still exists, that character matters, that people are more valuable than profits. This is very touching, James interrupted, but shareholders aren't here for stories. They're here for results. Then let me give you results, Vig. Lena pulled up her presentation. In 9 months, we've reduced employee turnover by 22%. We've saved over $8 million in recruitment and training costs. We've increased productivity across multiple departments by an average of 28%. We've become the most sought-after employer in the tech industry, with applications up 300% and our ability to recruit top talent at 40% below market rate because people want to work for a company that treats them well. She clicked through slides showing data that Robert's team had compiled. Cultural metrics, innovation indicators, long-term growth projections based on employee engagement and retention. CDS is offering you short-term profit at the cost of long-term sustainability. They'll cut costs by cutting people. They'll optimize operations by optimizing humanity out of the equation. And yes, your stock price will go up for a few quarters, but you'll be left with a company that's forgotten what Arthur Whitmore spent 40 years trying to build, a company that values people. People don't pay dividends, someone called from the audience. You're wrong. Lena looked directly at the speaker. People create everything of value. Innovation comes from people. Productivity comes from people. Growth comes from people. And when you treat people like disposable resources instead of valued human beings, you lose the very thing that makes a company worth investing in. She took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Arthur Whitmore gave me this company not because I have an MBA or because I understand corporate strategy. He gave it to me because I understand something more fundamental, that businesses are made of people, that profit without dignity is meaningless, That legacy is measured not by how much you accumulate, but by how much you contribute to human flourishing. Her voice dropped. I'm asking you to be patient, to invest not just in quarterly returns, but in building something that lasts, something that proves kindness and success aren't mutually exclusive, something Arthur Whitmore believed in enough to stake his entire fortune on. She sat down. The room remained silent for a long moment. Then the voting began. The process was electronic, immediate. Shareholders entered their votes through tablets. A screen at the front of the room showed percentages in real time, though the totals were hidden until all votes were cast. Lena watched numbers tick upward: 45%, 52%, 67%, 83%, representing how many shareholders had voted, not which way they'd voted. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Marcus squeezed her hand under the table. Robert maintained his lawyer's composure, but his jaw was tight. When the last vote registered at 100%, the moderator stood. The votes are counted. The results are as follows. For maintaining current leadership under Lena Carter, 54%. For accepting CDS's acquisition proposal and new leadership, 46%. The motion is denied. Ms. Carter retains control of Whitmore Technologies. The ballroom erupted. Some shareholders applauded. Others looked furious. James Reeves's face went through several shades of red before settling on a cold, pale anger. He stood abruptly and walked out without another word, his team scrambling to follow. Lena couldn't move. 54%. 8 percentage points. That's all that had stood between her and losing everything Arthur Whitmore had entrusted to her. Victoria Whitmore appeared beside her, smiling. You did it. You actually did it. We did it. Lena felt tears threatening. Thank you. Your 4% made the difference. My father made the difference. He saw something in you that you're only beginning to see in yourself. The courage to fight for what matters, even when everyone says it's impossible. Robert was already fielding calls from media outlets wanting statements. Marcus was coordinating with department heads to ensure business continuity. The machinery of corporate life continued grinding forward, indifferent to the human drama that had nearly torn it apart. But Lena stood still for just a moment, letting the reality sink in. She'd won. Against expertise and experience and conventional wisdom, she'd won. Not because she was smarter or more qualified, but because she'd convinced enough people that kindness was worth betting on. That night, Lena returned to Martha's diner. It was 2 a.m., the same time Arthur Whitmore had stumbled in 9 months ago. The same booth was occupied by different late-night patrons. The same fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the same smell of coffee and survival hung in the air. But Lena was different. She'd been tested by forces Arthur never faced when he conducted his experiment. She'd fought corporate warfare with weapons made of compassion and data. She'd proven that a waitress could run a billion-dollar company if she remembered that companies were made of people who deserved dignity. Marcus met her there, sliding into the booth across from her like they'd done hundreds of times before. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Couldn't stop thinking. Lena wrapped her hands around a coffee mug, drawing comfort from its familiar warmth. We won the vote, but this isn't over, is it? Probably not. James Reeves isn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. There will be other challenges, other battles. Marcus smiled. But tonight, you can rest knowing you won this one, against odds nobody thought you could beat. Arthur knew I could. Yeah, he did. Marcus looked around the diner. You going to keep working here? What? Your shifts. Are you going to keep them? Lena hadn't even considered the question. Running Whitmore Technologies consumed every waking hour, but sitting here in the place where everything had started, she realized she couldn't imagine giving it up completely. Maybe one shift a week, she said, as a reminder. Of what? Of where I came from. Of what matters. Of the person Arthur Whitmore saw when he looked at a tired waitress who gave him back $5. Lena's voice caught. I can't afford to forget that person. She's the reason any of this means anything. Marcus raised his coffee mug. To not forgetting. Lena clinked her mug against his. To not forgetting. Through the diner's windows, Philadelphia was beginning to wake up. Early morning workers headed to jobs that would never make headlines. People who cleaned buildings and drove buses and served coffee and kept the world functioning while others slept. Invisible people who deserved to be seen. Lena saw them. Arthur Whitmore had taught her to see them, and now she had the power to make sure they were never invisible again. The real work was just beginning. Dawn was breaking over Philadelphia when Lena finally left the diner, but instead of heading home, she found herself walking toward Whitmore Technologies. The building looked different in the early morning light, less imposing somehow, more like a place where actual humans worked rather than a monument to corporate power. She used her keycard to enter through the executive entrance, the security guard nodding in recognition. The elevator ride to her office felt shorter than usual, or maybe she was just too exhausted to notice time passing normally. Her office was exactly as she'd left it 12 hours ago, before the shareholder vote that had nearly cost her everything. Documents were scattered across her desk. Coffee cups in various states of emptiness marked the progression of a very long night. She should clean up, go home, sleep for the first time in what felt like days. Instead, she pulled Arthur Whitmore's letter from her drawer. The one Victoria had given her, written in Arthur's careful handwriting during his final days. She'd read it dozens of times, but each reading revealed something new. "If you're reading this, Lena," the letter began, "then you've survived the initial chaos. The lawsuits, the doubt, the people who will tell you that kindness is weakness and compassion is naivety. Good. That means you're strong enough for what comes next." What came next arrived before Lena expected it. Marcus called at 7 a.m., his voice tight with urgency. "Turn on the news, any channel." Lena grabbed the remote and switched on the television mounted on her office wall. Every business network was running the same story. James Reeves, CEO of Consolidated Digital Systems, had been arrested overnight on charges of securities fraud and market manipulation. Federal prosecutors allege that Reeves orchestrated an elaborate scheme to artificially inflate CDS stock prices while secretly shorting the company's actual assets, the newscaster reported. The investigation began after an anonymous tip suggested Reeves was using acquisition attempts, including the recent bid for Whitmore Technologies, as cover for a pump-and-dump scheme that defrauded investors of an estimated $800 million. Lena stared at the screen, barely processing what she was hearing. James Reeves, the man who'd called her naive and incompetent, who'd spent months and millions trying to take her company, was being led out of his office in handcuffs. The anonymous tip came with extensive documentation, the reporter continued, including internal emails and financial records that prosecutors say prove systematic fraud spanning at least 5 years. Robert Hutchinson appeared in her doorway, looking like he'd gotten even less sleep than she had. "Did you see?" "I'm watching it now." Lena couldn't look away from the screen. "Robert, who do you think sent that tip?" "I have my suspicions." Robert's expression was carefully neutral. "Though I imagine we'll never know for certain. Anonymous whistleblowers tend to stay anonymous for good reason." Something in his tone made Lena study him more carefully. "Robert, did you—" "I'm a lawyer, Lena. I deal in evidence and documentation. If someone happened to discover irregularities during their due diligence on a potential business partner, and if that someone felt ethically obligated to report those irregularities to the appropriate authorities, well," he smiled slightly, "that would just be good corporate governance." Lena felt a laugh bubble up despite her exhaustion. "You've been investigating him this whole time." "I've been protecting my client's interests. There's a difference." Robert moved into the office properly, closing the door behind him. "Arthur asked me to look after you, not just legally, but practically. James Reeves was a threat. I eliminated that threat using the only weapons that matter in situations like this: truth and documentation. What happens now? To CDS, to their shareholders. Chaos. The company will likely be broken up and sold. Shareholders who weren't involved in the fraud will recover some of their investment eventually, but it'll take years." Robert's expression sobered. "A lot of innocent people are going to suffer because of Reeves's greed. Employees who'll lose their jobs, investors who trusted the wrong person. That's the real cost of corruption. It spreads like poison through systems until everyone's infected." Lena thought about the Whitmore Technologies employees, the ones who'd been invisible until she'd forced the company to see them. How easily their lives could have been destroyed if CDS had succeeded in the takeover. How close they'd all come to disaster. "We need to do something," she said. "About what?" "About all those people who are going to suffer because of what Reeves did. The CDS employees who didn't do anything wrong but will lose their jobs anyway. Robert raised an eyebrow. Lena, you can't save everyone. Maybe not everyone, but we can save some. She was already pulling up financial projections on her computer. Whitmore Technologies is hiring, right? We need the talent. CDS employees are suddenly available. What if we made offers to the ones who weren't involved in the fraud? Good offers. The kind that show them there are companies that value people over profit. That's ambitious and expensive. We can afford it, especially now that we're not fighting a hostile takeover. Lena looked at Robert. Arthur gave me this fortune to prove something. That business can be done differently. That kindness isn't weakness. This is how we prove it. By catching people when they fall, not because we have to, but because we can. Robert studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll have HR reach out to CDS employees. We'll need to vet them carefully, make sure we're not hiring anyone who is complicit in the fraud. Of course, but anyone who's clean and qualified, we give them a chance. A real chance. News of Whitmore Technologies' hiring initiative hit the media that afternoon. Opinion was divided, as always. Some praised it as an example of corporate responsibility. Others called it a publicity stunt. A few suggested Lena was being taken advantage of by opportunistic former CDS employees. Lena ignored all of it. She'd learned that no matter what she did, someone would criticize it. The only thing that mattered was whether her actions aligned with the values Arthur had seen in her that night in the diner. The next 6 months transformed Whitmore Technologies in ways that surprised even Lena. The former CDS employees brought with them not just skills, but a hunger to work for a company that treated them as human beings. They'd seen what happened when leadership valued personal enrichment over institutional integrity. They were determined not to let that happen again. Productivity increased. Innovation accelerated. The company launched 3 new products that had been stuck in development for years, suddenly freed by a culture that encouraged collaboration over competition, creativity over fear. The quarterly reports reflected the transformation. Revenue was up 18%. Profit margins had recovered to near pre-reform levels, despite the increased labor costs. Stock price had climbed back to where it had been before Lena took control, and analyst projections suggested continued growth. Margaret Chen, who'd been skeptical from the beginning, requested a private meeting. I owe you an apology, Margaret said without preamble. I was wrong about you. About what you were trying to build here. Lena set down the report she'd been reviewing. What changed your mind? The numbers changed my mind. But more than that, Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. My daughter works in our IT department. I didn't hire her. She got the job on her own merit before I joined the board. I've spent 3 years pretending I don't know her at work, maintaining professional distance. Last week she told me this is the first job where she's felt valued, where her ideas matter, where she doesn't have to prove herself every single day just to be taken seriously as a woman in tech. Margaret's voice caught slightly. That's because of you. Because you created an environment where people are seen and heard. I've been in this industry for 30 years, and I've never seen a company culture transform this quickly or this completely. You were right. I was wrong. And I'm sorry it took me this long to admit it. You stayed, Lena said quietly. You could have resigned when I made changes you disagreed with, but you stayed and kept the company stable while I figured out what I was doing. That matters more than an apology. I stayed because Arthur trusted you. I figured a man who built a billion-dollar company from nothing probably knew something I didn't. Margaret smiled slightly. Turns out he knew a lot of things I didn't. That conversation marked a turning point. With Margaret's full support, the board became more united. Resistance that had been passive-aggressive became active cooperation. Initiatives that had been delayed got greenlit. The company moved forward with a cohesion it hadn't possessed in years. But Lena's biggest challenge wasn't at Whitmore Technologies. It was 15 blocks away, in a nursing facility where Mama June's condition had been steadily deteriorating. Lena visited every day, holding her mother's hand while Mama June drifted between the present and a past that seemed more real to her with each passing week. The doctor said it was the natural progression of her condition. The best care money could buy, and Lena could now afford the absolute best, couldn't stop the inevitable. Tell me about your day, baby, Mama June said during one visit, her eyes clearer than they'd been in weeks. I made some decisions about profit sharing, Lena said, settling into the chair beside her mother's bed. Every employee is going to get a stake in the company's success, not just executives. Everyone. The custodians, the cafeteria workers, the entry-level programmers. Everyone who contributes gets to share in what we build. Your father would have loved that. Mama June's smile was distant but genuine. He always said the people who do the work deserve to share in the rewards. Mama, Dad worked in a factory. He never said that. Didn't he? Mama June looked confused for a moment, then her expression cleared. Or maybe it was someone else. I have trouble remembering sometimes. It's okay, Mama. Lena squeezed her hand gently. No, it's not okay. I'm forgetting everything. Forgetting you. Tears welled in Mama June's eyes. Some days I don't even know who you are. My own daughter, and you're a stranger. I'm always going to be your daughter, even on the days you don't remember. How did you get so wise? Mama June touched Lena's face, tracing the features she'd known since birth. When did my little girl become this strong, incredible woman? You taught me. Everything I know about treating people with dignity, about kindness mattering more than money, about doing what's right even when it costs you something, I learned that from you. Did I teach you well enough? Mama June's voice was fading, exhaustion pulling her back toward sleep. Am I a good mother? The best mother. Lena held her hand, feeling how fragile it had become. You gave me everything that matters, everything that made me the person Arthur Whitmore saw that night, everything that's helping me build something meaningful. That's all you, Mama. All of it. Mama June smiled and closed her eyes. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing steady and peaceful. Lena sat with her mother for another hour, watching the rise and fall of her chest, memorizing the moment. She knew, with the certainty that children know these things, that there weren't many moments left, that soon she'd be alone in a way she'd never been before. But she also knew that Mama June had given her everything she needed to survive that loneliness. Strength and compassion and the understanding that treating people with dignity was worth any cost. 2 weeks later, Mama June passed away quietly in her sleep. Lena was holding her hand. The funeral was small. Lena invited only people who'd actually known her mother, neighbors from their old building, a few co-workers from the hospital where Mama June had worked before her illness. No media, no corporate representatives, no one who was there because of Lena's current position rather than her mother's life. Marcus attended, standing beside Lena throughout the service with the steady presence of someone who understood that some grief was too large for words. Victoria Whitmore came too, which surprised Lena. Your mother sounds like she was an extraordinary woman, Victoria said afterward. I wish I'd known her. She was just a home health aide who worked too many hours and never had enough money, Lena replied. Nothing extraordinary by the world's standards. The world's standards are wrong about what's extraordinary. Victoria's voice was firm. My father taught me that. You taught me that. Your mother taught you that. And now you're teaching 50,000 employees that. The lesson keeps spreading. That's what makes it extraordinary. After the funeral, Lena returned to her apartment, the nice one she'd moved into after the inheritance, though she'd kept it deliberately modest. She sat surrounded by her mother's things, going through photos and mementos, trying to process loss that felt oceanic in scope. Her phone rang. Robert Hutchinson. I'm sorry to bother you today, he said gently, but there's something you need to see. Something Arthur left for you to find after your mother passed away. He was very specific about the timing. What do you mean? Can you come to my office? I know it's asking a lot right now, but I think you'll want to see this. An hour later, Lena sat in Robert's office while he placed a sealed envelope on his desk. The envelope was addressed to her in Arthur's handwriting, with a note, to be opened only after June Carter's passing. How did he know? Lena whispered. How did Arthur know my mother would? He didn't know when, but he knew eventually, and he wanted you to have this when the time came. Robert pushed the envelope toward her. Take your time. I'll give you privacy. Lena opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter, several pages long, and a smaller sealed envelope marked personal. She read the letter first. Dear Lena, Arthur had written, if you're reading this, then you've lost your mother. I'm so sorry. I never met June Carter, but I know she raised someone extraordinary, which means she must have been extraordinary herself. The world is poorer without her, and you are navigating grief that I imagine feels impossible to survive. I know something about that kind of grief. I lost my wife 30 years ago. Eleanor was the only person who ever saw me as something other than a means to an end. When she died, I thought I'd never recover. For years, I functioned but didn't live. I built an empire but forgot what I was building it for. That's why I conducted my test. I needed to know if I'd become the kind of person Eleanor would have been proud of, or if I'd transformed into something unrecognizable. A man who valued profit over people, success over significance. You gave me my answer, Lena, in the worst moment of my life. When I was stripped of everything that gave me identity and purpose, you saw me. You treated me with dignity when I looked like nothing. You gave me back $5 that you desperately needed because some things mattered more than survival. In that moment, you proved that Eleanor's values, the values I'd lost somewhere along the way, still existed in the world. That kindness wasn't extinct, that treating people as human beings was still possible, even in a society that had commodified everything. You saved me, Lena, not from poverty or illness or death, those were inevitable, but from dying without knowing that the world still contained people like Eleanor, people like you. That's why I left you everything, not just money and companies, but responsibility. The responsibility to prove that business can be done differently, that profit and compassion aren't mutually exclusive, that legacy is measured in human flourishing, not shareholder returns. You've already proven me right 1,000 times over. The company is transforming. Employees are thriving. The culture is shifting. You're building exactly what I hoped you would build, a model for how capitalism can serve humanity instead of consuming it. But now comes the hardest part. Now you have to do this without your mother, without the person who taught you everything that made you the woman I saw in that diner, without your anchor. I can't make that easier. Grief is a solitary journey that no amount of money can shorten, but I can give you one final gift. Open the second envelope. It's the last thing I can do for the person who gave me dignity when I had nothing left. With trembling hands, Lena opened the second envelope. Inside was a check made out to the June Carter Memorial Foundation for $100 million. There was also a brief note. This foundation is for people like your mother, home health aides, caregivers, service workers who sacrifice everything to take care of others and never receive the recognition or compensation they deserve. Use it to provide scholarships, health care, retirement security, whatever you think will honor your mother's memory. Build something that ensures people who do the invisible work of caring for humanity are finally seen and valued. Your mother gave you the tools to change the world, Lena. Now you have the resources to do it in her name. Make her proud. Though I suspect, given who you are, you already have. Lena read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Arthur Whitmore, who'd been dead for almost a year, had somehow understood exactly what she'd need in this moment. Not just money, though the foundation would do immeasurable good, but permission. Permission to grieve and purpose to survive the grieving. She spent the next month working with Robert to establish the June Carter Memorial Foundation. The announcement generated enormous media attention, but for once, Lena didn't care about headlines or public opinion. This wasn't about her image or the company's reputation. This was about honoring the woman who'd taught her that dignity mattered more than dollars. The foundation's first initiative was a scholarship program for children of service workers. The second was a healthcare fund that provided comprehensive medical coverage for home health aides and caregivers whose employers didn't offer benefits. The third was a retirement security program, ensuring that people who'd spent their lives taking care of others would be taken care of in their final years. Within 6 months, the foundation had helped over 10,000 people. Within a year, that number had grown to 50,000. The impact rippled outward, changing lives in ways that quarterly reports could never capture. And through it all, Whitmore Technologies continued to thrive. The profit-sharing program Lena had mentioned to her mother became reality, with every employee receiving a stake in the company's success. The worker feedback system identified and resolved problems before they became crises. The culture of dignity and respect attracted the best talent in the industry. 2 years after the shareholder vote that had nearly cost her everything, Lena sat in a board meeting reviewing annual results. Revenue was up 45% from when she took control. Profit margins were the highest in company history. Stock price had increased 67%. Employee satisfaction was at 94%, unheard of in an industry where 70% was considered excellent. "These numbers are extraordinary," Margaret said, reviewing the report with something like awe. "Every metric we track is not just improved, but transformed. Customer satisfaction, innovation pipeline, market position, all of it is better than it's been in a decade." "People perform better when they're treated well," Lena replied simply. "That's not revolutionary. It's just human nature." "It's revolutionary in this industry," Margaret countered. "Most tech companies treat employees as interchangeable resources. We treat them as human beings with value beyond their productivity. That difference has made us the most successful company in our sector." "Not the most profitable," Dennis's replacement pointed out. "There are companies with higher margins." "But none with our sustainability," Marcus interjected. He'd been promoted to Chief Operating Officer, a position that recognized his crucial role in translating Lena's vision into operational reality. "Those high-margin companies have turnover rates of 40 to 50%. They're constantly recruiting and training, losing institutional knowledge, burning out talented people. We're building something that lasts because we're building it with people who want to stay." The board meeting continued, but Lena found her attention drifting. She looked out the window at Philadelphia spreading below, at the lives being lived in buildings and streets, at the invisible people keeping everything functioning. After the meeting, she did what she'd done every Thursday for the past year. She went to Martha's diner and worked a shift. The other waitresses had long since stopped being surprised by this. Lena Carter, Billionaire CEO, spending every Thursday evening serving coffee and taking orders alongside them. She wasn't particularly fast. She was out of practice, and her executive responsibilities had given her new aches that made the physical work harder. But she was consistent. "You don't have to do this, you know," Marcus told her once. He'd started joining her, working the grill like old times. "You proved your point. No one thinks you've forgotten where you came from." "I'm not doing it to prove a point." Lena refilled a customer's coffee, delivered it with a smile, and returned to the counter where Marcus was plating an order. "I'm doing it to remember, to keep myself grounded, to make sure that the person Arthur Whitmore saw that night never disappears completely under all the CEO responsibilities and board meetings and strategic decisions. That person isn't going anywhere. She's too stubborn." "Maybe. But the world has a way of changing people. Money, power, success, they're seductive. They whisper that you're special, that you've earned the right to stop caring about the small things. I need to remember that nothing about me is special except the choices I make. And those choices only matter if I stay connected to what matters." That Thursday night, around 2 a.m., and an old woman came into the diner from the rain. She was soaked and shivering, clutching a worn purse like it contained everything she owned. Lena recognized the look in her eyes immediately, the same expression Arthur Whitmore had worn: fear and exhaustion, and the desperate hope that someone, anyone, would see her as human. Lena grabbed a towel and approached without hesitation. "Come in out of the rain," she said gently. "Let's get you warm and dry. How about booth 3? It's right by the heater." The old woman flinched, then looked at Lena with surprise. I have money. I can pay." "I'm sure you can. Let's just get you comfortable first. Coffee? Something to eat?" As Lena guided the woman to the booth, she felt something shift inside her. This was it. This was why Arthur had left her his fortune. Not to run a company or make shareholders wealthy, but to continue spreading the lesson forward. To see people when the world insisted they were invisible. To offer dignity when society said some people didn't deserve it. She brought the woman coffee and food, staying to chat for a few minutes, learning her name was Dorothy, and she'd been evicted after her fixed income couldn't keep pace with rising rent. Dorothy had been staying in shelters but preferred to spend nights in 24-hour diners when she could afford it. "Safer," she said. "More human." When Dorothy finished eating and tried to pay, Lena gently refused the money. "This one's on me," she said, "but I can pay. I know, but you keep your money. You'll need it more than we do." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you being kind to me? You don't know me." The question echoed across time. Arthur had asked the same thing in this same booth 2 years ago. The answer was still the same. I don't need to know you. You're here. You're human. That's enough. After Dorothy left, Marcus came out from the kitchen and stood beside Lena. You just gave away free food to someone who could pay. Very un-CEO-like. Maybe being CEO doesn't mean what everyone thinks it means. What does it mean? Lena thought about Arthur's letter, about her mother's lessons, about the journey from that first night to this moment. She thought about shareholder votes and hostile takeovers, about grief and growth, about learning that kindness was the most radical act of resistance in a world built on ruthless efficiency. It means having the power to make sure that when people are at their lowest, when they have nothing and no one sees them, there's someone who chooses to see them anyway. Someone who treats them like their dignity matters as much as anyone's. She looked at Marcus. That's what Arthur taught me. That's what I'm trying to build. Not just a profitable company, but a model for how we could treat each other if we remembered that profit isn't the only thing that matters. You're succeeding, Marcus said quietly. You know that, right? Not just at running the company, but at the bigger thing, the thing Arthur was really trying to accomplish. Some days I'm not sure. Some days I wonder if I'm just fooling myself, if this is sustainable, or if eventually the world's going to force me to compromise these values to survive. And on those days? On those days, I remember a dying man who tested the world to see if kindness still existed, who found his answer in a diner at 2 a.m. from a waitress who couldn't afford to give anything away but did anyway. Lena smiled. And I remember that if it was worth $5 then, it's worth $5 billion now. The math is the same, the choice is the same. See people as human, or see them as numbers. There's no middle ground. 3 years after Arthur Whitmore's death, Lena stood at the podium of a business ethics conference, invited to speak about her leadership philosophy. The audience was full of executives and entrepreneurs, people who commanded companies and fortunes, people who wanted to understand how she'd built a successful business while maintaining seemingly impossible ethical standards. I'm going to tell you a story, Lena began. 3 years ago, I was a waitress making minimum wage. I had $47 in my pocket, and I was short on rent. An old man came into my diner and tried to pay for coffee with $5 that might have been all he had. I gave him back his $5 because treating him with dignity mattered more than 57 cents profit on a cup of coffee. She paused, looking out at faces that ranged from curious to skeptical. That old man was Arthur Whitmore. He was conducting an experiment, testing whether kindness still existed in a world that had taught him everything had a price. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know that simple choice would change my life. I just knew that some things were more important than money. Lena clicked to the next slide, showing Whitmore Technology's performance over the past 3 years. The numbers told a story that skeptics couldn't dismiss. Consistent growth, industry-leading retention, innovation that had revolutionized their sector. Everyone told me that treating people well was naive, that I couldn't run a successful business while prioritizing human dignity, that profit and compassion were mutually exclusive. They were wrong. Not because I'm smarter or more talented than other leaders, but because I understand something fundamental. Businesses are made of people, and people perform better, innovate more, and commit more completely when they're treated as valuable human beings rather than interchangeable resources. She talked for 40 minutes, sharing data and stories, failures and successes, lessons learned from building a company culture based on dignity rather than domination. When she finished, the applause was generous, but the questions were pointed. Isn't this just good PR? Someone asked. A way to build brand value while still maximizing profit? If it were just PR, it wouldn't work, Lena replied. Employees can tell the difference between genuine culture and performative values. What we've built at Whitmore Technologies is real because it's embedded in every decision we make, from executive compensation to how we treat our custodial staff. That authenticity is what makes it sustainable. But you have the luxury of Arthur Whitmore's fortune, another person pointed out. Most of us can't afford to prioritize ethics over efficiency. You're assuming ethics and efficiency are opposed. They're not. Our efficiency increased when we started treating people better because they were more engaged, more committed, more willing to go beyond minimum requirements. The luxury wasn't the money. The luxury was Arthur Whitmore showing me that kindness matters, and then giving me the platform to prove it at scale. The questions continued, some hostile, some genuinely curious. Lena answered them all with the patience of someone who'd learned that changing minds was a slow process measured in conversations, not conversions. After the conference, a young woman approached her hesitantly. "Ms. Carter, I'm Sarah Kim. I run a small startup, 12 employees. We're struggling to compete with bigger companies that can offer higher salaries. Do you think your model works for companies that don't have billions in resources?" Lena studied the young woman, seeing herself 3 years ago, uncertain, overwhelmed, trying to figure out how to do something meaningful in a system designed to reward ruthlessness. "It works even better for small companies," Lena said. "You can build the culture from the beginning. You don't have to retrofit dignity into an existing system that resists it. Treat your 12 employees like their value extends beyond their productivity. Give them ownership of your success. Create an environment where they're seen and heard. You'll outperform companies 5 times your size because you'll have something they can't buy, genuine commitment." "But what if I can't afford it? What if treating people well costs more than I can pay?" "What if not treating people well costs more in the long run?" Lena countered. "High turnover, low engagement, constant recruitment, those have costs too. They're just hidden in ways that don't show up on quarterly reports until it's too late." Sarah Kim's expression shifted from doubt to possibility. It was a look Lena had seen before, the moment when someone realized that maybe, just maybe, there was another way to build something meaningful. "Thank you," Sarah said. "I'm going to try." "Good. And when it gets hard, and it will get hard, remember why you started. Remember what matters more than easy profits." That conversation stayed with Lena on the flight back to Philadelphia. She thought about all the people trying to build something better, fighting against systems and assumptions that insisted kindness was naive and compassion was weakness. She thought about Arthur Whitmore, conducting his test in the streets, searching for proof that humanity wasn't completely lost. And she thought about the $5 she'd returned to a dying man, never knowing it would return to her as everything she'd never asked for and exactly what the world needed her to have. 5 years after that night in the diner, Lena stood in front of Whitmore Technologies headquarters at the unveiling of a new monument. It was simple: a bronze sculpture of a diner table with 2 coffee cups and a $5 bill. A plaque beside it read, "In memory of Arthur Whitmore, who taught us that dignity matters more than dollars, and Lena Carter, who proved him right." "I didn't do this alone," Lena told the assembled employees and media. "Every person who works here, who chooses every day to treat others with respect, who remembers that we're building something more important than profit margins, they're all part of this." Arthur's test didn't end that night in the diner. It continues every time one of us chooses to see people as human rather than resources. Every time we prioritize long-term flourishing over short-term gains. Every time we prove that business can be a force for human dignity instead of exploitation. The speeches continued, but Lena's mind drifted back to Martha's diner, to her mother's lessons about treating everyone with respect regardless of their circumstances, to Arthur Whitmore's sad eyes and the way he'd asked her to remember that night. She had remembered. She'd built an entire empire on the foundation of that memory. And now thousands of employees, millions of customers, and countless communities were benefiting from a choice she'd made when she had nothing to give except the dignity she refused to withhold. That night, Lena visited her mother's grave. She did this often, sitting beside the headstone and talking about her day, her decisions, her doubts and triumphs. Tonight she told Mama June about the monument, about the foundation that bore her name, about all the lives that had been changed because one waitress had seen one homeless man as human. "I think I finally understand what you were teaching me," Lena said softly. "It wasn't just about being kind. It was about understanding that kindness is the most powerful force in the world when it's backed by courage. Arthur gave me the resources, but you gave me the courage. The courage to believe that treating people well isn't naive or weak. It's the strongest, most radical thing you can do in a world that's forgotten how." The wind rustled through trees planted around the cemetery. Somewhere in the distance, the city hummed with life, people working, struggling, surviving, hoping. Lena stood and placed flowers on her mother's grave, then walked back to her car. Tomorrow there would be more board meetings, more decisions, more challenges from people who thought profit and compassion were incompatible. There would be new James Reeves figures trying to take what she'd built. There would be skeptics insisting that eventually she'd have to compromise her values to survive. But tonight, Lena Carter, former waitress, current CEO, inheritor of a fortune built on $5 returned, knew exactly who she was and what she was building. She was proving that Arthur Whitmore's test had revealed a truth that transcended one person or one company. That kindness, backed by courage and resources, could transform not just businesses, but the entire system of how we treat each other. She was proving that dignity was worth more than dollars, that legacy was earned through character, not inherited through blood, that the smallest acts done when nothing could be gained could become the greatest revolutions. And she was proving it one person, one decision, one act of seeing and being seen at a time. The $5 she'd refused to accept had returned to her as $5 billion in responsibility. But the math had never changed. Treating people as human was always worth the cost. Always had been. Always would be. That was Arthur Whitmore's final gift to her. Not the fortune, but the proof that she'd been right all along. That her mother had been right. That dignity wasn't expensive. Indifference was. And armed with that knowledge, Lena Carter had built something that would outlast them all. Not because it was profitable, though it was. Not because it was innovative, though it was that too. But because it was true. Because it honored the fundamental human need to be seen and valued. Because sometimes refusing $5 changes everything.